in Africa. One more time, you're welcome. This year's summit is going to feature something very phenomenal. That's right. I believe a lot of you are already aware of the launching of the State of Fashion Law and Policy in Africa report. Yes, there's been some work on the ground, and we're going to be having that launch today. So, ladies and gentlemen, please fasten your seatbelt and welcome to quite an amazing time. Before we move further, we want to kick off with our opening address by the woman who kicked everything or who set the ball rolling. This is one phenomenal lady. Getting to know her has been quite amazing, and it's been quite a journey following through all she has done in the fashion law space. I'm talking about the executive director of the Fashion Law Institute of Africa. That's Bernice Assain. So quickly, I'll just go through her bio. For those who do not know her so well, of course, you would know better of this amazing, phenomenal woman who has accepted the reins of kicking for making fashion better in Africa. Bernice Assain, or as you would know, legally savvy, is the executive director of the Fashion Law Institute Africa, a fashion lawyer, author, and the convener of the Pan-African Fashion Law and Policy Summit. Bernice is passionate about creating legal awareness and within Africa's fashion and creative space. She founded PAFALAPS, of course, as the Pan-African Fashion Law and Policy Summit, out of a clear vision to bridge the policy gap in the African fashion industry and to provide a platform for fashion law and policy tailored to the African fashion industry, enabling it to thrive. And trust me, with her at the helm of affairs, we are actually thriving so far. Ladies and gentlemen, for the opening remarks, please welcome the amazing, the intelligent, of course, my executive director. Welcome, Bernice Assain. Bernice, over to you for your opening remarks. You're welcome.
Thank you so much, Goslov. Good morning or good day, everyone. You're welcome to this summit. I'm super excited to be here, to talk about one of our favorite things, fashion law and policy. Um, I would give you a background on why we decided to start up having conversations around fashion law and policy. As somebody who has played in the creative space, working as a lawyer in the creative economy, one industry that I have seen over the years take back seats is the fashion industry. Now, yes, I know that we are always in conversations when it comes to entertainment and things like that, but when it comes to commerce, when it comes to trade, when it comes to the money conversation, when it comes to industrialization, people do not talk about the textile and apparels industry. We're always left to the back seat, right? And when we talk about policies, when you see that there's a new law in the creative economy being set up, you really see that the fashion industry is put into consideration very much. And as much as you look at it, you would realize that the fashion industry is very unique in its own sense, in that it is cultural, it is commercial, it is also artistic, right? So one of the conversations that we realized that we were having constantly is, what exactly do we want from the law? We know that law can can provide certain solutions to the fashion industry, but how do we know that as lawyers? How do we know what the fashion industry wants? And that's one of the reasons why we decided to set up this particular summit, to bring together stakeholders, to have conversations about this fashion industry that is very dear to us, and see the pain points that we have, and see how that we can advocate for better policies and better laws for the fashion industry. I, for one, as a fashion lawyer, I represent a lot of creative brands. And one of the problems that we have really is, how do we enforce our intellectual property? It's one thing to tell people to register their IP, but how do we close the gap of enforcement? How do we ensure that people are well aware of their rights? Those are conversations that I have had for the past 5 years. And we just thought, you know what, it is important for us to bring the stakeholders, the people who are involved, the people who are affected by these gaps in laws. And that's one of the reasons why we decided to start up the summit, to see how that we can push for laws that is favorable to the fashion industry, to also see how that we can have a seat in policy conversation. Now, every deliberation we're going to be having today is obviously going to be documented, and we'll see how that we can push this to become, policy and a representation of what the industry really wants. So yes, we are here today to talk about a lot of things, and we have spent the last 1 year trying to prepare a report on what the laws are currently across the regional areas that you have on the continent. We've seen how that we can, look at the laws and say that this needs revamping, this needs reenactment, this needs an inclusion of a fashion-centric, policy. So we've gone through all of these laws, and we've decided to say, oh, we're going to make recommendations for change and take a stand on what the industry again really wants. So we will be having conversations around the fashion industry, the various subsectors of the industry, what the legal frameworks are. We have somebody who would be speaking on the fashion industry and legal frameworks. We also have a panel session to talk about the laws that apply to the fashion industry in general. And then, very importantly, we have, various stakeholders from fashion councils to talk about what they are currently doing, what they are working on, and what they have in mind for the fashion industry. We want to move from just being an entertaining industry to being an industry that is about the business of it, an industry that can employ the people that we have, in that industry, an industry that can also provide protection for the stakeholders that play in this industry. So yes, we have put all of this together to see how that we can position the industry right and start having very important conversations about the fashion industry in general. So yes, I'm grateful to all the people who have decided to join us today to lend their voices to the fashion industry, to all of the people who contributed to the reports that we are presenting today, and everybody who has decided to join us online. This is the very first summit. We hope to keep at it till we see the relevant change that we want in the fashion industry. So thank you so much for your time. I hope that you take one or two things from this summit as you go. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Bernice. What an amazing way to kick off. Of course, listen, gentlemen, I said that's the brains behind all this, and she's doing a phenomenal job. She said something towards the end. We're going to keep at it until we actually get what we're looking for. Now, that's the African strength. We would always ensure that we keep hitting and moving for it, especially when it comes to something that is dear to our heart, that's fashion. She also said, we'll move from a space of just entertainment to actual business. Listen, gentlemen, that is phenomenal. It's very fundamental where we know that it's not about being entertainers, where the fashion comes in as a form of entertainment. Listen, fashion is expression. Fashion is identity. So if someone would not benefit from their identity and from how they express themselves, why then are we doing this? And I believe that starting off with ideas like this, it's a step in the right direction, and we're moving forward to something great. Thank you so much for the opening remarks, ma'am. Thank you so much. Okay, right now we're going to moving into our onto our keynote address. We have quite a phenomenal woman here with us, speaking to us as our keynote speaker, and that's the person of Isioma Nena Alexis Idigbe. She's a partner at Punuka Attorneys and Solicitors Nigeria. So a quick bio on Isioma before she takes over. Thank you so much, ma'am, for already joining us. Isioma Nena Alexis Adigbe is a partner at Punuka Attorneys and Solicitors, one of Nigeria's foremost full-service business law firms, where she leads the media, entertainment, intellectual property, and technology practice. A passionate advocate for the creative industries, Isioma entered the field of entertainment law after recognizing the legal challenges facing practitioners in the Nigerian film and creative sector, going on to obtain a specialist certification in entertainment law to deepen her understanding of the industry. Her practice spans intellectual property, advanced enforcement, media transactions, film and music rights, fintech, and technology law. Ladies and gentlemen, with such an amazing repertoire as for a keynote speaker, please welcome, give us our keynote address for today, Isioma Adibe. You're welcome, ma'am. The floor is yours. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, I'm so pleased to be here. Apologies, I did send my bio quite late, and so some of my little work I've done in the fashion industry was contained in there, but I'm sure that will be shared later. I'm so pleased that I was invited to give this keynote. I've been following the wonderful work being done by the Fashion Law Institute, not just in Nigeria, but across Africa. And I really have to give Bernice a lot of kudos. We've never been opportune to meet, but I have been a fan from afar. So thank you so much. And thank you, all of you, for taking time out of your day to listen to the little that I have to say. So just some background, very much like Bernice and the Fashion Law Institute, when I came into the creative industries to provide legal services, it was a function of just like the summary that was done of just noticing that there was very low quality, if at all, any kind of legal services being offered in this space. And beyond offering services on a business to business basis, it was obvious that the policy issues were sort of the more important things where you have what I like to term as communities of creatives versus a creative industry. And it's something that I see that a lot of creatives don't like. When I say you don't have an industry, you're just a community of creatives. But when you look at what if you define an industry, the level of depth, monetization, commercialization, industrialization, you find that across the 49 sectors of which fashion is one and actually one of the most significant ones, you find that you will not be able to say that these sectors are actually functioning as industries. And so when I was given the topic to speak on today, which is legal and policy issues shaping the future of African fashion, I felt this is spot on. And for the last couple of years, I've sort of been on a campaign, especially in the fashion industry. So, some history. About 2 years ago, I was asked to give a training. There's a project called Lagos X Paris that was instituted by the French Cultural Office in Nigeria, coordinated by Creative Hub, or so I forget the name. And that project really opened my eyes to the real challenges of persons within the fashion industry. And also, my husband's family actually own a garment factory. So I've been very much exposed to some of the challenges um, that the fashion industry faces. But I'll say the Lagos X Paris program, which I completely recommend that program to any young designer, um, really was very eye-opening. We had to really get to know the businesses of these young designers. And we had not just Nigerian experts like myself, but international experts that, understood supply chains, market access, and things like that. It was clear that these were major gaps within the Nigerian fashion industry, and I would say probably affects the wider African context. So, in starting this conversation, it's important to establish that Africa has always occupied a space on the global stage. And I think that starting with that and placing yourself not just as a regional force, but as a global force, really starts to frame what we want fashion to look like in Nigeria or in Africa, sorry, from a legal and policy framework perspective. Now, when we say Africa has always occupied a space, you may think, well, do we have any large global African fashion brands that exist? And I will argue that African fashion has made its way into several global fashion brands. And because of the lack of an enabling environment, an enabling policy framework, whether or not Af- that fashion has been adequately compensated is, it could be argued that it has not been. And I'll give some examples. If anybody remembers when Dior debuted its spring 2023 collection in Cairo's Court of Honor, the world took notes. Adidas collaborated with Tembe Magudu, which was Africa's first LVMH prize winner. Even in Nigeria, we've had people like Lagos Space Program, win big, awards. I very much remember a Burberry collection. I don't remember the date. This must have been around 2010, 2009, that looked exactly like Joel by Lisa's collection, if anybody remembers when this happened. And when the information came out, apparently Burberry had come into Lagos, and drawn by Lisa Falana. She was so excited, and she led them into her studio and showed them everything. And the next spring summer collection had embellished Ankara designs, which Draw by Lisa was very known for at the time. So all these examples I give, and these are LVMH, these are some of the biggest luxury brand Burberry homes have had successful, even the Ghana Must Go collection, they've had successful uses of typical African fashion, and yet were the originators of these fashion designs or concepts adequately compensated? And so my first thesis in addressing this keynote is to say that African fashion is not emerging. It is here. It has arrived. And so what is only emerging is that, unlike what we saw happen um, with the Dior and Burberry examples, you are now beginning to see a trend where you have certain fashion houses beginning to penetrate the global market, having recognition in their own right as African fashion brands. So an example of that would be Andrea Yama, Hetuba, um, Banke Kuku, those types of brands are now beginning to be identified as African fashion brands with African founders, designed and produced in Africa. Now, but with this recognition comes an urgent question, which is, who holds the needle and who holds the rights? And so today I want to walk us through the legal and policy landscape that either empowers or constrains African fashion. So we're saying we're not taking a position. In the course of this keynote, we're going to analyze all the issues, and you will see where it lies. And what, as an industry, because I believe most of us here as lawyers, we end up becoming a critical part of the industry anyways, must demand to change. Now, the most fundamental question is intellectual property. If you look at the examples I gave before, you see that the exploitation of intellectual property, which is why we can have this fundamental basis to say African fashion is indeed not emerging, it is here. But a lot of that has been that there has continuously been an exploitation of African fashion for centuries. The kente cloth that originates from the Ashanti Kingdom in Ghana, the kanga fabric woven into the identity of East African coastal communities, the Bogolan mud cloth, which carries centuries of Malian tradition. Yet, how many of these textiles, patterns, motifs are routinely reproduced by international brands without any recourse to the communities where those things originate from? We're very proud of Ghana that they were able to get a geographical indication and cultural status for their kente cloth, which was a huge move in establishing their ownership of those intellectual properties. And the reason why you have all these exploitations and arguably not enough compensation or attribution to the originating communities is because the current frameworks for intellectual property within Africa are not built with communal or traditional knowledge in mind. Copyright focuses on protecting individual creators. The trademark law protects commercial identifiers. Neither adequately address a weaving pattern passed down from generations to generations of a local community. If I'll use, I will have to rely heavily on Nigeria, as this is my jurisdiction where I practice. But in Nigeria, our copyright law, thankfully, has been somewhat updated, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But our trademark law, patent and design laws are still not up to date. I know that there's a geographical indicators bill waiting to be passed at the National Assembly now, which would help us in being able to do more geographical indicators. But the question is, even if they pass that bill, is there still the political will to go ahead and start to file some of these GIs that we really need to have? A few years ago, if anybody remembers the scandal, I can't remember what it was. There was a particular word, a very Nigerian word, that somebody tried to trademark in the UK. And that's what, and we have to be careful as we are now being recognized, right? You are then exposed to more people trying to exploit without compensating the societies where these things come from. Now, the World Intellectual Property Organization Intergovernmental Committee on Genetic Resources, Traditional Knowledge and Folklore has been negotiating a treaty on traditional knowledge since 2001. More than 2 decades of talks, and we're still waiting for binding international instruments. Whilst in the meantime, brands continue to profit and communities continue to watch. However, as I say this, you have some examples of countries like Australia and New Zealand, particularly New Zealand, where they've gone ahead of these international organizations and enacted regulations within their countries that protect the communities where some of these intellectual property akin to fashion and design originate from. So what are some African countries therefore doing to address this gap? I'll use Nigeria because Nigeria's Copyright Act has some of the more progressive legislation on the continent. With the passing of the new Copyright Act 2022, the act defines folklore as a group-oriented, tradition-based creation that reflects the cultural and social identity of a community, transmitted orally or by imitation. And critically for fashion, it explicitly lists drawings, paintings, carvings, handicrafts, costumes, and indigenous products of folklore as protected categories. So this means that things like adire, Ashoke weaving patterns, Akwete textiles, Akwacha, Funta, and similar heritage works fall squarely within its protection in principle. It also has a consent requirement. That is that any party wishing to make commercial use of the expressions of folklore must first obtain permission from the relevant indigenous community and or the Nigerian Copyright Commission. Now, this is a significant step forward because it creates a legal gateway that brands must pass through before exploiting Nigerian traditional textiles commercially. It also has an attribution obligation where a folkloric expression is used, the source must be attributed, the community or place of origin must be mentioned. And this direction addresses the practice, of using Ankara-inspired patterns, because I think we really suffered from this a lot, with no acknowledgement to their roots or any other similar kind of exploitation. It now creates civil and criminal liabilities for unauthorized use of, and civil liability for damages. And criminal liability applies to anyone who willfully distorts an expression of folklore in a manner prejudicial to the honor, dignity, or cultural interest of the originating community. The last provision is notable because it's not just about money, it's also about cultural respect. Now, there's also a structural limitation, and here's the critical gap. The right to authorize the use of those expressions kind of vesting some of those rights within the Nigerian Copyright Commission is challenging because the first question you ask is, where is the registry of those communities and the works that they own? In principle, yeah, we have this, law that seems to be trying to tackle these issues. But in actually implementing this, what's the practicality? So if today I want to use a particular cloth from a particular place, one, how do I even know that this cloth is from this place and how do I get to those people? And does NCC even have, because since NCC has the ability to grant consent, because it says and or, right? Therefore, it means that NCC could also grant consent for things that they also don't know. So what is their plan to really implement this particular provision? You know, now, the Act also does not address AI generated works that draw on traditional patterns, or nor does it regulate the use of traditional knowledge in AI training sets. I mean, it's obvious that the law has now become antiquated with the AI revolution, and it's clear that there's going to be a need to review that law. And I'm sure it's not just Nigeria going through this. Every country's copyright law has essentially become obsolete at this point. So the lesson to be learned from this law, where you have some level of legal framework that is protecting this traditional knowledge, traditional designs, patterns, and things that forms a basis, a background for African fashion, is great. But you see, legislation without effective enforcement capacity, community awareness, how many communities are aware of the provisions of the Nigerian Copyright Act and how they can benefit from it? And digital age provisions as a foundation is just a foundation. It's really not a solution. However, it becomes something that can be built on when you are looking at the overarching policy framework for African fashion. Now, apart from this is what, we're now looking at, okay, most of the laws have gaps. There's this one example of a law that has some kind of protection. Counterfeiting within Africa is at astronomical levels. I mean, if you just go on Instagram, I'll use an example. This happened to me about 2 weeks ago. For whatever reason, some fabric sellers page popped up on my TL on Instagram. And so I was looking at it. Most things looked interesting. And then I stumbled on a design pattern for Wanifuga being sold, like just boldly being sold on Instagram. I wanted to repost it on my page and call out the brand, but I just couldn't be bothered. And so what I did was to send it to the Wanifuga, I sent them an email. I mean, look at this. And there are a lot of, I've had clients come. The new thing now is people take their designs to Turkey, and then is mass produced in Turkey, and they can sell those designs in Nigeria for a fraction of the price that the Nigerian designer can sell it for, because of the economies of scale, right? Turkey has a well-established garment manufacturing industry. So they are able to produce a high quality garment and replicate a Nigerian designer and sell that plus tariffs and whatnot, and we'll go into tariffs in a bit, and sell it at a fourth of the price that the Nigerian designer is selling it at. And that tells you that there's a big problem. But you see, fashion is not very much different from film. Film has the same supply chain challenge. And I've been known to notoriously say that piracy, and I also think counterfeiting, is a proof of concept in itself. It shows that there are people willing to buy your products. People like the designs, they want to buy it. But there's a challenge between when the design is made and how it gets to the consumer. And policy framework and an enabling environment should bridge what that gap is, what the supply challenge is. Now, within that, of course, enforcement is critical. And this is where all the relevant government agencies, the customs agency, the copyright commission, the trademark, all those agencies are supposed to be working with the industry to enforce their rights and to discourage counterfeiting. But fundamentally, it's like playing jack. If you've ever gone to an arcade and you play those games where there's like a little rat and you have to hit it and hit it, that's basically what it is. So I guess I'm now posing a question to us to say is, should the focus be about enforcement of rights versus solving this supply chain issue that has clearly been identified by this kind of consumption pattern? And so I'll leave that as a question mark in this keynote. Maybe by the time we're done with the rest of the keynote, maybe we'll solve it, maybe we'll not, but that's our next question mark. Now, the next issue that really affects fashion in Africa is the trade policy issues. Dressed for exports, undressed of benefits is sort of how I've couched this section of my keynote. And I'll talk about the AFCFTA opportunity. Now, the African Continental Free Trade Area, is a very ambitious trade initiative. Very ambitious. Africa has a combined market of 1.4 billion and a GDP exceeding 3.4 trillion, which means that there's a transformative potential for the African fashion ecosystem, just within Africa alone. For fashion, this should mean seamless movement of textiles and garments across borders, standardized rules of origin that favor African manufacturing, and the possibility of regional fashion supply chains that keep value on the continent, in principle. Now, the first thing is I don't know whether it's an opportunity or a misfortune, but I've had the misfortune of sitting, no, I'll say this, of sitting at some of these AFCFTA, like, when they're talking, pardon?
It's been quite a wonderful time. Please, you have about 3 minutes more for the keynotes, please.
Okay.
Thank you.
So, when they do these group setting discussions, they lump everything creative industry into IP. And then there are these professors that are not doing any of the contemporary things within the creative industry that sit down and have very academic decisions around the IP protocol that is supposed to affect the entirety of the creative industry. And the conversations are so antiquated and unfortunate. For a subsector first of all, the creative industry should have its own group discussing how it's going to leverage AFCFTA. And within that, each subsector within that creative economy, including fashion, should have its own subgroup where they discuss their own sector peculiarities in terms of how they can leverage AFCFTA. However, the AFCFTA protocols for fashion and the general creative industries remain underdeveloped. Non-tariff barriers, complex custom procedures, inconsistent standards enforcement, infrastructure deficits continue to frustrate intra-Africa trade. And so, nobody is deriving the benefit of AFCFTA, and fashion is no exception to that. Now, the AGOA and preferential access paradox. The Africa Growth and Opportunity Act that has been in existence since the year 2000 provided duty-free access to US markets for eligible sub-Saharan African countries. And so for certain countries like Ethiopia, Kenya, and Lesotho, they've built entire export industries around AGOA benefits. But AGOA has structural problems for fashion. It essentially creates and encourages a cut and make manufacturing rather than a design-led value creation. And then you see countries like Nigeria where we clearly have a design-led value creation, but we're not benefiting from industrialization and actually establishing proper garment manufacturing industries. And when you look at our fiscal policy, and I said I was going to talk about this, I know you've given me the 3 minutes warning. Nigeria, for example, has this strange policy dynamic where you have very high tariffs for the raw materials needed to produce products, none of which we produce in Nigeria. Even our cotton production is dismal. And then the tariffs for the finished products are not as high. So that's why somebody can take my design, take it to Turkey, produce it, ship it back to Nigeria, and they can sell it for 1/4 of what I can sell it for as a person who designed that product. So that shows you that the fiscal policy is not even designed to support the growth. First of all, shows that they don't understand the fashion value chain from, cotton growing to ginning to textile manufacturing and garment manufacturing. None of that is understood. You have a couple of people who have kept the tariffs on finished cotton high because they are nostalgic about a cotton revolution in the north that we don't have a strategic advantage for right now. And that simple fiscal policy mismatch continues to inhibit garment manufacturing growth in Nigeria. And there's no political will to address that because of the northern cabal that has this, nostalgia for the cotton revolution. Okay, I really, because I thought that a keynote I planned for 20 minutes, but let me then just go down to my conclusions. Maybe in the Q&A, I'll be able to address some more points. If I were to give my recommendation in terms of the demands that for a policy agenda for African fashion, it should be one, for national governments to enact and fund traditional knowledge protection legislation with IP registries accessible to artisan communities, to establish fashion industry desks within trade and IP offices. In Nigeria, for example, we're lucky. We have a Ministry of Creative Economy. And if you look at their mapping reports, I can send that if you haven't seen it. I was opportune to work on it. The fashion industry is clearly identified as one of their key focus sectors. We've never had that before in Nigeria. And I encourage this institute to engage with that ministry to ensure that their follow-up policy work is relevant. And a lot more countries should replicate having someone whose business it is to deal with the fashion industry. Create appropriate fiscal policies to support the growth and development of the sector. And then for Africa as a whole, develop AFCFTA specific protocols. Sorry.
No, it's a good pause. It's a good pause. You're doing quite a phenomenal job as a keynote. That's why I've been informed to listen. You can have 10 more minutes. Let's enjoy this.
Thank you. I'm glad. So I'll just still stick with my conclusions. Develop AFCFTA specific protocols where you simplify rules of origin for African designed and produced goods and all other sort of trade issues that we need to resolve. Engage with the WIPO IGC negotiations with a unified African bloc position that prioritize banning instruments on traditional knowledge. And I have to say this, because our borders in Africa are so thin, even this issue of geographical indicators, traditional knowledge is a little bit more peculiar for Africa. So, for example, just look at these jollof wars that we make so much noise and laugh about, but it's a real issue. Which country can own the geographical indicator for jollof rice? Which country? It's likely that we may have to have peculiar arrangements where groups of countries share a geographical indicator because you have communities that share boundaries that have created a particular traditional knowledge. You know what I mean? And so that's why you have to work together to define what does traditional knowledge legislation look like for Africa based on those types of peculiarities. And of course, championing African representation in AI governance to ensure that our cultural heritage protections are embedded in global AI regulatory frameworks. And for the industry, build legal literacy into design education. Every African designer should know and understand how to register a trademark, a design mark, protect a copyright, or hell, read a licensing agreement. Establish industry-funded legal defense funds. I think this is something that the Fashion Law Institute can really think about in terms of finding a way to protect African brands from infringement, especially when this infringement is by bigger international or even local players. And engage in supply chain due diligence, not as compliance theater, but as a genuine commitment to ensure that we're able to really try and deal with these supply chain issues that I've already identified. And some people argue about this digital infrastructure and investing in African-based e-commerce platforms. To me, I don't think those things are as important. I think it's about playing up our own commercial advantage, and I feel our commercial advantage is design and manufacturing, because we have a young population, and that population can produce high quality goods when trained, and they can design beautiful things that a lot of people want to see. So in closing, there's a concept in Aka's philosophy, Sankofa. I hope I pronounced that well. Represented by a bird that flies forward whilst looking back. And it teaches us that we must retrieve what was left behind in order to move forward wisely. African fashion is a Sankofa industry. It draws from centuries of cultural heritage while innovating for a global future. Its designers are not merely creating garments, they are asserting identity, creating and claiming economic agency, and writing history in fabric. But creativity without legal protection is vulnerable, commerce without fair policy is exploited, and culture without advocacy is borrowed, appropriated, and sold back to us at a premium. So the legal and policy frameworks that govern our industry are not abstract matters for lawyers and some less knowledgeable diplomats. They determine whether a weaver in Kente receives royalties or nothing. They determine whether a garment worker in an export zone earns a livable wage or not. They determine whether a Lagos designer owns her brand internationally or watches someone else register it. These are the threads of justice, and it's time that we move them into law. Thank you very much.
Goslov, you're muted.
Oh, sorry about that. Sorry, thank you so much. I was saying we have keynote speakers and then we have amazing keynote speakers. That was phenomenal. That was next level. Wow. I would say that keynote alone is a full lecture when it comes to the African fashion market and how we can bring in several players. That was phenomenal. Great job, ma'am. Great job. Okay, I'll gather myself right now, put myself together because I've been writing. I hope you were all writing because that was simply amazing. At this point, I want to open the floor for questions. I know that a thought-provoking kind of keynote as such has made a lot of us think more. So please, if you have questions, I'm looking for those who want to identify with a question. It would be nice to have those questions now. So please, the floor is open to us. While we wait for those questions, I'll just reiterate on some things she said that really stood out for me. She said something that I believe a lot of African fashion players are not understanding. The African fashion industry is not emerging. I think that's one mistake a lot of us are making. And I think that's the statement we should put out there. We're not emerging. We've been here. We've arrived. We've been here. And it's high time we start treating African fashion as such, letting the world know that we didn't just arrive. We've been doing this. They are the ones trying to get from us. And I think the word they were trying to trademark then was Yoruba in 2015 that caused that issue. Yes. So I know that I also have a question personally while we wait for other questions. Would we say the lack of awareness or proper regulations are the issues, or is the issue for the should I say degradation in our fashion industry? Could it be that a lot of people are not aware of the frameworks we have already, or could it be that our frameworks are not strong enough to handle the issues coming up when it comes to counterfeiting, when it comes to basically theft of people's IP rights? So are we saying it's a lack of awareness or a lack of proper regulations to actually handle these issues? So over to you, man, please, while we wait for other questions. Thank you.
So thank you. Great question. I'm so glad that the keynotes was well received. I actually think is a combination of both. So, for example, that's why I decided that I was going to go into detail as to what the options for protecting of traditional knowledge were under the Copyright Act, because I don't think a lot of people know and actually realize that it applies to fashion, for example. Um, but in the same breath as I say that, it therefore then means that NCC has a critical enforcement role to play. And I mean, even if in the on the nose industries like music and film, where they can, instantly see where they play a role, they're underwhelming in terms of enforcement, how much less so fashion. So I think there's a lot of interagency coordination that needs to be done that isn't quite done, that should make enforcement more efficient for the government agencies that have a responsibility to do that. And that's on one side. But the industry actually has a lot of responsibility because, it's your business. And that's why I always say that I don't still see these spaces within the creative economy in Nigeria as functioning through industries. Because you ask yourself, how are you even engaging with this government to get them to enforce for you? So I'll contrast it with what I've seen in music. So I sit as a secretary of the Music Publishers Association and the Record Label Association. These two associations are constantly engaging with the NCC, with the Ministry of Culture, with the NBC Broadcasting Commission, all these relevant agencies to them. Now, a few weeks ago, the NCC was able to nab this guy that owns something called Nets Nigeria or something. It's a platform that infringes on music. And the guy was arrested. They collaborated with Interpol to get him arrested. That's because as an industry, they are organized, working together on their common goals and engaging government. Because guess what? Government is inefficient by design. Every government everywhere in the world. If you are not making your problem their problem, then they're not making your problem their problem. I don't know if you get what I mean. So that's why I say the fault is on both sides. And then there are some things that are just, pure business enforcement issues. So you as the business owner, as the brand owner, should enforce your rights. Did you even adequately protect that right in the first place? That's number one. And let's even assume you did it. Then you should be ready to enforce it. But people have legal fatigue very easily, especially in the creative industries. They sort of just give up and let it go. And when that happens over and over, you essentially are telling the infringers that they can do whatever they like and you're not going to fight them. And so it becomes a continued pattern and everybody's losing money all round because of all these issues. Thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Thank you. Thank you. I like where this conversation is going because at this point we're getting to think. One thing that I believe many people never thought Africans would get to, or a point they never thought would get to, is the point of thoughts. Because initially Africans just did things without really thinking them through. Okay, is it working? Let's move on. But now we're thinking and we're creating policies. And I like what you said because during your keynote, you also mentioned that, and I think I'm going to drive it home even to the Institute. We cannot wait for the government to kick off most of these things. A lot of them are not actually enlightened on things like this. It's our job to wake them up. It's our job to show them the pathway that this is how it's meant to be done. Now, that's where everybody comes together. And I think that's where this particular institute, I thank God for this vision. It's going to create that awareness, letting the government know. I know even recently, the owner of Net Nigeria, the movie page, as well had similar issues. If players in movies and music are putting so much effort into creating and protecting their spaces, that means we in the fashion that cuts across all these other industries, is our job to protect our home. And the moment we begin to give policies and frameworks that work, the government will surely listen, because at the end of the day, when it works best for us, it will increase for better fiscal policies, because they make more money at the end of the day. We make money, they make money, we're all happy. Okay, thank you so much, ma'am. We have a question in the chat box. And the question reads, good afternoon, ma'am. Thank you for an enlightening session. My question is, how can policymakers and African fashion creatives collaborate more effectively, or especially smaller fashion brands? How can policymakers and African fashion creatives collaborate effectively, especially small African brands? So speaking on more on collaboration.
Okay, so I guess the question is, who are we defining as policymakers? Because I think all of us sitting here are policymakers. And I think already being here is one of the strongest steps that you can take. I also think it's about trying to solve what problems that you can solve as a group. And so I'll just give like a small example. Um, Anybody who knows this brand Ziva and Zephas and Co. Um, if you were following Tanya Motayo's social media for the last week, she's been in China with the founder of Zephas and Co. And you would think, well, wow, I mean, they're direct competitors, really. They produce pretty much the same kind of garments, mid-market, fast fashion. Why would they go to China together to be sourcing? But if you actually think about it, that is brilliant because they are pulling resources and both brands are growing. So sitting in a group or coming together on your common good is one of the most strategic things that you can do as small fashion brands, right? Come together, you have common issues. For example, garment manufacturing is an issue for every fashion designer, whether you're a large brand, whether you're a small brand. In Africa, we have a strange way that we operate in the fashion space where a fashion designer also owns a garment manufacturing whatever, which is abnormal. That is not actually how it should work. You should be able to design, and there are people who specialize in garment manufacturing. This is one of those infrastructure deficits that we have, and so people have had to do that so that they can produce. But for example, I would think that smaller group of brands can come together and either support someone who is doing garment manufacturing or set up a garment manufacturing thing to serve them. And I've seen carpenters do this. I just have this carpenter, his name is Jamil. Terrible guy, but really talented. Anybody who has dealt with African or Nigerian artisans knows exactly what I'm talking about. And so one day, Jamil hadn't delivered my cupboard or something. And so I had to trace him to like where his shop was somewhere deep inside the mainland. I got there, and you had this building. It was a duplex that had these very complex machines. I was surprised. I said, Jamil, you have this? I said, no. So in that whole area, it was, these little carpenters, but they shared those facilities. I don't see why, for example, in the fashion industry, those types of innovations cannot happen to solve policy issues and solve immediate business issues. So I want to check the name of who asked this question. Rejoice. I hope that my answer has been helpful. These are just some ideas, I would say, in terms of how you can collaborate more effectively to deal with issues of policy and to deal with some of the issues around business. Thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am. I like the fact that you clearly said it. We are all policymakers. So it starts with every one of us. Once there's a mind shift, and of course, not just shifting the mind, shift your mind and put it down. And ensure that you're making your voice loud with it. You're putting it out there. Amazing. Okay, we have a hand for a live question. Hello, Sandra. I think I want to have your live question. The floor is yours. Please remain on mute.
Hello, good morning. Thank you, everyone. I appreciate the intervention of Izioma Edigbe. I hope I pronounce your name well.
Yes, thank you.
I just want to emphasize what you just said. I think it's very important that even the most famous brands in Africa come together, whether it is nationally or regionally. Because you know what? If you take the example of France, where you have the most famous luxury brands, when they want to penetrate Japan or China, they have a committee. The name is Committee Colbert. They are competitors, but when they want to penetrate a market, they gather together. They decide the strategy of penetration of the market. And the moment, even in Nigeria, I think they have a strategy to penetrate Nigeria or Ghana they decide a strategy and the step, and they decide who will be the first to go. And when if you check, you will state that when you have one brand, progressively, the other brands come in the country and install their shops and their commercial teams. And so we also can do that. For the example of Cameroon, we don't even have a fashion council, which is not normal, you know. And I also want to react of what you said before concerning geographical indicators. Do you know that the African Organization of Intellectual Property, they have a politics of protect geographical indicators, even when it's concerned 2 or 3 countries. For example, you have the Kente textile, which concern Ghana and Ivory Coast. Since I think last year, the Kente is now a geographical label, indication géographique protected. So it is very possible. And I think this platform is very important for us to know each other and even to organize some workshop because since the African Intellectual Organization is, we have only Francophone countries, so it can be helpful to collaborate with Anglophone countries because there is already a frame and a policy which works, you know. Just to add.
Thank you, Sandra. That's a great intervention. And we also don't have a fashion council in Nigeria. It's really sad. But I know that if you look at the mapping report from the Ministry of FMECTC, their name is really long, is one of the things that they are thinking about doing. And in fact, in this last UK-Nigeria delegation, where creative industry was one of the pinnacle points of collaboration between the UK and Nigeria, this issue of creating a fashion council was discussed. So I think that that's going to be implemented. Again, this institute really needs to engage and really highlight why we need that and make sure we get the ministry's attention. Yeah, and I completely agree. It's so much easier for the Francophone countries with OAPI. With the Anglophone countries, it's a disaster. And that's why if you sit on those AFCFTA calls when they're talking about IP, you lose your mind because you have some people saying, no, let's not harmonize. Let each country adapt in their, and it's like if the IP laws are not harmonized, you cannot do anything. You simply cannot do anything because there is no certainty of what happens, what protections I have it from one market to the next. It's already a trade barrier. So I can't believe how people will be in an AFCFT call trying to do the IP protocol and they're telling me that harmonization is not the only option. How? Look at the success in Francophone Africa with OAPI. So I hope that the IP protocol for AFCFTA lands on harmonization. And I think that would be a step forward in bringing some of the innovations you have in OAPI into the wider African market and sort of making things seamless from a trade perspective. Thank you.
And I agree. It will be a good idea for the Fashion Institute to connect officially with the support of all the legal professionals, to connect officially to the OAPI, to connect officially with the IAFTCA. Even the Afrexim Bank is doing a good job, but they are not they are not into legal policy. So I don't know what do you think about that, but
so
since we have this platform, yes.
I mean, I've worked with Afrexim on their film finance policy, right? And they, funny enough, I think they have some money to fund policy initiatives. The question is, how do you put that within the context of the commercial initiative? Because they're a bank, but they're a development bank. So you kind of have to tie that policy work into how it's going to affect the commerce. And I think with fashion, it's actually a lot easier to do that than with film, for example, because when you look at garment manufacturing, the garment manufacturing angle, right? It's just manufacturing. They just happen to be producing clothes. And from a business perspective, it solves a lot of problems. It's significantly revenue generating. It can employ people, so it's like it's a multiplier, just that particular vertical when you look at the entire fashion. So to me, I feel like it's shocking to me how underestimated fashion is.
Yes,
Because
really, like
for all the problems we have in Africa, if we took our fashion industry seriously, it would solve a lot
many
of problems.
problems. Yes.
Much easier than all these other noisemakers in music and film. They're my people, oh, but you know what I mean? Like a garment
Yes.
factory can hire like 1,000 plus people, 4,000 people at one go, and keep them busy because people must wear clothes. You know what I mean? So
And
yeah,
fashion industry is
Okay, I
is a
think
transversal industry because
yes,
it began with agriculture.
exactly.
You
So
know,
there's a lot,
there
yeah,
is a lot to do.
Okay,
yeah.
ladies and gentlemen, I think at this point we might need to put a pause on this because we have so many more questions in the chat box and we need to go through them because we have other items on our agenda for today. But sincerely, thank you. I like where this is going. It shows that, again, we're thinking and we're trying so hard to make sure that we put something going. And I'll keep saying, I thank God for the Institute. Something is changing. There's going to be something happening soon in the Nigerian and, of course, the African spaces, basically, when it comes to fashion. Okay, so we have other questions. Please, I'm taking just these three questions in the chat box. So quickly, I want to move on. I will see how we can quickly wrap up each of the questions. The first question from Janus Studios, I think Janus reads, do you think the price for IP and trademarking designs locks out emerging talent and businesses finding their feet from having these protections for their creations? So if I'll paraphrase, I would say, do we think the price for IP and trademarking, when necessary, and of course, industrial designs and all the registrations, if they lock out emerging talents and businesses finding their feet from having these protections for their creations? Sema, over to you, please.
So I mean, yeah, the problem with IP is that it's territorial. So yes, so when you're trying to get broad protections, that is, for example, I'm trying to be protected all across Africa, it can get pretty expensive. Luckily for Francophone Africa, they have OAPI, which means all their IP laws are harmonized, and you file in one country, you're covered in all countries. So this is why, just back to the point I was making about the opportunities with AFCFTA, if something like that was implemented in AFCFTA, for example, it will solve a lot of problems for, African emerging talents. But the problem is that when you go and sit in consults with the trademark registry in Nigeria, they tell you they don't want that because they are afraid that if it's opened up in that's why they refuse to sign on to the Madrid system. They're afraid that if it's that open, then they are going to lose revenue. And my view is that is completely short-sighted because it will come down to proximity and efficiency. If the trademark registry in Nigeria is closer to me and is efficient and is more cost effective, and I still get all this global coverage, I'm likely to still use it. But because they don't want to compete on essentially customer satisfaction or whatever, they keep holding us hostage. And to me, whatever money they're generating is nothing compared to the money we're losing from the fact that it is too expensive to get broad coverages for these designs that are originating from the continent. So I think as stakeholders, we have to keep pushing, but I will be very realistic. Governments don't like anything that touches their money. So even in pushing for this, we need to be able to show them how much money they are losing, and the fact that these organizations are being short-sighted by thinking about the money that they are directly losing versus the money that the entire country is losing. We need to be smart about that narrative, but it's something we must tackle because people being able to protect their works as broadly as possible, at least in the bare minimum, Africa-wide, is something that we should achieve if we want to be serious about African fashion meeting its potential.
Okay, thank you so much, ma'am. Do not forget that we're still going to have panel sessions after this. She mentioned something about harmonization. We're going to talk a lot about harmonization later on during the panel session. So please do not go anywhere, because we're still live at the Pan-African Fashion Law and Policy Summit of 2026. It's been quite an amazing time. We're taking questions now from the keynote address given by our amazing keynote speaker, that's Isioma Idingbe. Okay, I'll move quickly to the next question we have here. The question reads, hello, good afternoon. I'm aware of the need for regulations to protect our craft and tradition in Africa, especially from the West. But how do we decide who owns what when things get passed down from generation to generation? In fact, most of us have similarities, making it difficult to trace where exactly something comes from. That's an amazing question. Over to you, ma'am, please.
Yeah, I think I touched on this during my keynote to talk about the fact that, we have this particular peculiarity in Africa. Actually, you see it in other countries, but I think in Africa is actually worse. Our borders are thinner. And, I think we have to come up with an African solution for that. I'm glad that Sandra talked about the fact that Kente appears in Ivory Coast and Ghana, because I've been wondering how is Ivory Coast responding to the fact that Ghana has essentially taken Kente as their GI. And to me, it need not be a fight. It could have been a joint application between Ivory Coast and Ghana. And we're going to have to do that. But again, in my experience with how governance works, even within the country, the relevant ministries and agencies cannot even talk to each other to effectively deal with issues that have to do with this particular sector or any sector. And then you can imagine if we're saying that it should be a a cross-country type of conversation. AFCFTA would have been the fastest solution, because if we had protocols within the AFCFTA that say, for example, almost like a stopgap before a country can register a geographical indicator, they almost have to clear that there is no other country or community in another country that can have a claim to that. And in that clearance process, if it's established that there's another community with something that is the same or very, very similar, then they would share those GIs. Like those are the kind of protocols we need to have. So that in the case where the countries are not talking to each other, there's some sort of law, that will force them to have to talk to each other and make sure that those overlaps are dealt with. Again, as the practitioners within this space, it's our job to make sure that the government understands these things. Well, I don't even believe in waiting till someone gives you an opportunity. Keep talking about what we think should be AFCFTA protocols to deal with these particular issues that are peculiar to, for example, like Africa or whatever. But by the way, it's not just Africa. Like if you look at Inuits, for example, you have Inuits in Greenland, in Canada, and in America. That's, those Native American cultures, they know themselves. And so they benefit from certain, things, not necessarily fashion, but there are certain things that are shared benefits because they understand them as one tribe, even if they cut across different countries. So if they can do it, we don't have two heads. It's all about just being creative and making solutions for what is our own reality.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. So the final question will be taken for this particular session. It reads, Adbaru Subaliu, please, I hope I didn't slay that, from Ethiopia. We have such issues, and I want to do more on this policy thing. We're really struggling with copyright, branding, patent, trademarks, etc. Also, is there any office in Ethiopia? I want to work on this. I'm a fashion educator, lecturer, and researcher. So please, I think this is why this is an institute. I think I should push that question as well to you, ma'am, as well as Bernice, to know if we have anywhere in Ethiopia that should actually get on board with this.
I mean, they must have a trademark office in Ethiopia. That's for certain. And especially Ethiopia is one of the biggest garment manufacturers in Africa. Unfortunately, it's not very design-led, which was one of the things that I was talking. It's more about they send you the cloth, you stitch it together, you ship it out. And that's fine. So they do take this space seriously within that context. Um, I don't know how much. I know I was in a conference several years ago, and there was some conversation around Ethiopia trying to protect certain crafts that are like a cultural heritage thing. So they have a trademark office, and that office would have a huge role to play in a lot of this. And I would recommend that the individual, tries to engage with that office. I know they have like a Ministry of Culture as well. Okay, the person says yes, thank you. We're struggling, yeah. So I mean, listen, like I've sat in many calls in Nigeria. Our trademark patents and design registry sits under the Ministry of Industry and Trade, which is separate from where our copyright registry is, which is under the Ministry of Justice. It's just a pain. It doesn't make sense, but it is what it is. And when we have complaints, there's nothing unique. Like our trademark system in Nigeria is horrendously slow. It can take you 4 to 5 years to register a trademark in Nigeria, as at the pace of how work is done today. Our design registry moves a little bit faster, which is unfortunate. It shows that people are not filing as many designs as they should. And so what we tend to do is to engage with um, the minister, engage with the DG. It's just a constant engagement. That's really all you can do. You need to keep putting yourself in a position as much as possible to be able to move the needle forward. And it takes time. It's taking me, what I've been doing this for 10 plus years. It's taking me that much time to build these inroads. And hell, a new government can come in next year and I'm back to ground zero. So you need to keep up, with your contacts in there. Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much, ma'am. I must say that was a phenomenal keynote, and to all the questions that came in during that session. Amazing work, amazing work. At this point, we have to move on. Please do not forget, I'm happy that we're networking in the chat box. Please, let's keep the networking going. That's why we are doing this, the way whereby we can network and come together to create something substantial for Africa. Okay, yes, she's dropped it in the mailbox, so please let us reach out to her. Thank you again, thank you again, ma'am. That was phenomenal. At this point, we want to quickly move into our panel session to have panel one. That's talking about regional updates, the state of fashion law and policy in Africa. This will be, would have the country representatives from 6 African regions, and this particular session will be moderated by Irene Afen. Irene Afen is a lawyer and chartered taxator. She is the managing partner of Kylum Partners with experience in litigation and a practice focused on legal and strategic advisory for creative, fashion, and lifestyle businesses. She serves as the Abuja State representative of the Fashion Law Institute Africa, contributing to industry development, education, and professional engagement within the fashion and creative sectors. Through her work, Irene is committed to bridging the gap between legal systems and creative enterprise, helping to position fashion businesses for long-term growth, both locally and globally. Hello, Irene, you're welcome. So over to you for your panel session and your team. Carry on, please.
Thank you so much, Godslove. I really appreciate the introduction. Welcome to panel one of the Pan-African Fashion Law and Policy Summit 26. This panel will be talking on regional updates, the state of fashion law and policy in Africa. I'm here with representatives of the 5 regions in Africa with the objective of presenting the raw picture of the state of the African continent as regards law and policy development for the growth of the fashion industry. I would invite each of our regional representatives to speak for about 4 to 5 minutes to give an overview of the state of fashion law in their respective regions. Afterwards, we would open up the conversation for questions and interactions. From this conversation, we hope to have a clear picture of what is working, what is missing, and what needs to change. I'm very excited. So without much ado, let's begin. I would start with our representative from Central Africa, Ms. Sandra. I would read her bio, her professional bio. Sandra Joko-Moyo is a strategic legal professional specializing in business law, banking law, intellectual property, and digital law. She holds degrees from Université Robert Schumann in Strasbourg and from FASSE, Faculty of Social and Economic Sciences, in the Institut Catholique de Paris. In 2017, she completed an executive MBA in global fashion management at the Institut Français de la Mode. She brings over 20 years of experience as a corporate legal professional, having managed corporate client portfolios within leading banking and financial institutions, including GE, LCL, ING, Fortis BNB, Paribas, BPCE International, Société Générale, Mercedes-Benz Financial Services, and COFILOISIRS. In December 2022, she founded Cara & Co., Legal Intelligence and Strategic Advisory, a consultancy agency providing high-level strategic legal counsel grounded in legal intelligence. With a strong commitment to fashion, creativity, and sustainable development in Africa, Sandra Joko-Moyo is the initiator of Oboso Brands Factory, an eco-responsible digital incubator based in Cameroon. The project is dedicated to supporting the emergence of creative brands in Cameroon, Central Africa, with the ambition of showcasing Cameroonian and African creative talents on continental and international stage. So Sandra, the stage is yours.
Thank you very much for the introduction. Again, I'm very glad to be here. I think it is a very important conversation we have, and it is the right moment. Indeed, the Fashion Africa, the African fashion exists. We are already there, but we do not yet have a strong fashion industry, as our previous intervenant said. So to present the state of policy in Cameroon and Central Africa, if we begin by the trademark and design protection, as an OAPI member, OAPI is the African Organization for Intellectual Property. So Cameroon is a member of this organization. So the intellectual property is standardized within this agreement. So we have the OAPI trademark concerning brand names, logos. We have the copyright for original works concerning sketches and patterns. Previously we spoke about the infringement and the designing. And what I state is that many designers don't know that you can protect your sketches, you can protect your patents, and I think it is the least expensive fees concerning intellectual property fees. We also have registered industrial design through OAPI and patents, but patents are very marginal in Cameroon and in the whole regions. Okay, someone asked the question about the access to IP rights. It's very expensive. As I was shocked personally to state that, for example, for example, if you want to fill the online or IP rights, it will cost you less in France, for example, than in Cameroon, which is not normal. The fees are very expensive, so it is a great limitation for the protection. And we had recently in 2024 a court case which constitutes the most significant precedent in Cameroon intellectual property law, but it was not concerning fashion industry. So we are still waiting a a court case concerning fashion industry. The good news is that the court admit the unfair competition and counterfeit infringement under OAPI law. It means that if a designer has already protect his creation, he or she can go to the court and win the case. About the cultural and heritage community rights, because we are under OAPI law. We already have in the country some cultural and traditional design which are protected. And we are still in the process, for example, for the DOP textile, which is African. So it is not, I think it is an advantage for the Cameroon and for the central region. The most significant gap in intellectual property law is that since 2025, now you can subscribe online. Before, you have to move to Yaoundé, where is the headquarters of OAPI, and it was another limitation for the protection. But now all the formalities can be done online. So that is a great update concerning concerning intellectual property law. What I will say also, it is that there is Cameroon is also under the OADA law, which is the regional agreement concerning business law in general. So the OADA agreement covers corporate law, contract law, and corporate law, contract law, real estate law. And this is very important when you want to do business. But unfortunately, for little, smaller designers, they are not aware that they can use these tools to strengthen their business. Recently, I even have a case. I was working with a beauty brand in Cameroon, and her partners doesn't want to sign the contract because they say, but you are too small. So what do you want us to sign a contract? And I have to explain to the partners that it's in your interest and the interest of the brand to sign this contract, because if she negotiates, for example, for a foreigner, it is a sign of business safety. When you don't know the country, to sign a contract, it is a security for you. So there is a great work of awareness, legal awareness, and intellectual property awareness to do. What we need now to strengthen fashion law in Central Africa is first to make the price accessible, the price to offer.
So sorry to cut you. We're running out of time. If you could just round up in 30 seconds.
Yes, yes. So
yeah.
the last recommendation, lastly, the recommendation I will do is principally to make the price accessible for IP rights, and to in order to awake the business, the designers on intellectual property, is to create clinic, legal clinic, affordable legal clinic in order to inform them about their rights. I have more to say, but I only have 20 seconds. So.
Yes, we are sorry about that, and we appreciate you being able to round up.
Thank you.
I think we can move on to our representative from East Africa, Stacey Sang. I hope that I am pronouncing your name correctly. Stacey Sang is an advocate of the High Court of Kenya with experience in commercial law and arbitration and a specialization in fashion law. She is passionate about the regulation and protection of the fashion and creative industries, with particular focus on intellectual property, ethical business practices, and sustainable industry growth. Stacey brings valuable industry insights from over 8 years of professional experience in high fashion, commercial modeling, and pageantry, and is the Miss Universe Kenya 2024 second runner-up. She's honored to serve as a country representative of Fashion Law Institute in Kenya, where she seeks to advance legal awareness and professional standards within the sector. Stacey, the floor is yours. Remember, 4 to 5 minutes.
Thank you so much. And I'm really honored to be part of this conversation. Thank you for the opportunity. So now that I have 4 to 5 minutes, I'm going to be brief and hopefully capture everything that you need to know within this short time. So in Kenya, the major legal and policy frameworks around fashion law is, I think, what has already been talked about, intellectual property law. We have the Industrial Property Act, which protects industrial designs, that is the shapes and patterns. We have the Copyright Act, which protects artistic works. We also have the Trademarks Act, which protects basically the logos and the names of the various fashion brands that need to be registered. And in Kenya, the main body that governs intellectual property law is called KIPI, that is Kenya Industrial Property Institute, and they handle the registration of all IP rights under the same body. Apart from IP, which has been talked about, we have other laws that govern fashion law, that is the commercial and contract law. We also have a law that speaks on our cultural knowledge and expressions, and it's called the Protection of Traditional Knowledge and Cultural Expressions Act 2016. I found this very important to highlight because as Africans, we're rooted in our culture. There's a lot of cultural talk that has been talked about, like the Kente from Ghana. We have our Maasai culture. So having a law such as the Protection of Traditional Knowledge and Cultural Expressions Act is very important to mention because it protects fashion-related cultural knowledge, including traditional designs, textiles, and costumes. This is very important. As much as we have these laws, I think, as has been said by the various speakers who have gone ahead of me, there's still gaps in the laws that specifically address the fashion legal framework. So there are no laws that specifically address this industry. And as we know, the fashion industry is a fast-moving industry, and thus having that specific legal framework is very important to cover it, which is one of the most significant policy gaps. In Kenya recently, in Kenya, there's a major transition phase regarding now geographical indications. So before, this has not been a topic that has been really talked about. However, there's a specialized legal framework called the Geographical Indications Bill 2026 that is coming up. And this bill is focused on protecting the origins of the different brands. So for example, if as we've been talked to by our keynote speaker, for example, the Kente in Ghana have that geographical indicator. So this is what our bill or this act is supposed to cover: protecting the origin of the brands, increasing their productive value, and empower the different counties here in Kenya. In Kenya, we have a number of counties, so ensuring that the traditional knowledge and the different products that come from the different parts of Kenya are actually recognized and registered. And that is something that is very important. I'm hoping that it will come into law very soon. It will be a big change in our culture. For our case study, it's something I've already talked about. So Africa, we're rooted in culture. We really appreciate where we come from. And one of the major, and I actually do come from a county called Kajiado County. And in Kajiado County, the majority tribe here is the Maasai. And I know most of you have heard about the Maasai. You have heard about how their culture, their name, their designs, their patterns, their beads have been used by big brands like Louis Vuitton. We have Ralph Lauren, who've also used them in their various collections, and this is without recognition of where this actually comes from, the Maasai people. However, in 2010, there was launched a Maasai Intellectual Property Initiative, and this initiative was meant to reclaim control of the cultural assets from the Maasai people, to set legal precedent for the African communities and cultures, and also, very important, recognize and have the Maasai people benefit from their knowledge and culture. This is very key and important in fashion law, and I'm so happy to know that this actually happened, and we're protecting our cultural heritage and knowledge. And I think I have around a minute left, so I can go to a bit of recommendations and also what is happening in our country. So for recommendations, I love what we're doing here, increasing the conversations and knowledge around fashion law. And this is something we need to do in Kenya and in Africa, continuously having conversations around fashion law and teaching people of the importance of having that special legal protection for fashion law. It has been discussed here during this summit how fashion law is very important, because if we have good structures, we can be able to create employment, we can be able to generate so much revenue. But all this depends on having these conversations and having policies and structures in place to protect our fashion industry in Kenya and in Africa. We can also involve the necessary stakeholders, e.g. the designers, models, etc., anyone who is affected by the fashion industry. More often than not, when we're creating laws and policies, we do not really, especially in this sector, we do not really go to the stakeholders, and they are the ones who know what they want and how we can actually make the industry better. So involving the stakeholders. And I'm happy to report that in Kenya, we actually have a Kenya Fashion Council. And in the Kenyan Fashion Council, the various stakeholders come together to enhance policy, advocate for sustainability, and enhance global visibility of made in Kenya fashion. This is such a big, big initiative for the Kenyan fashion industry. We also have the Africa Sourcing and Fashion Week Nairobi. And I know one of our representatives from Kenya here at Fashion Law Institute Africa is going to be speaking on it. It's going to be taking place from 30th April to 2nd May 2026. And these forums are created to have conversations around the fashion law. So I'm really, really proud to announce that if you're actually going to be in Kenya around this time, you can attend the various sessions that are going to take place. But I'm happy to be included in this conversation, happy to see how we can do and collaborate as different countries. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you so much, Stacey. It's really nice to see all the things happening in Kenya. It's looking very promising for the next couple of years. So we're going to move forward to Southern Africa, and representing Southern Africa is Mandisa Nzimande. Mandisa is an admitted attorney of the High Court, the founder and managing director of Nzimande MN Attorneys, a dynamic and client-focused firm established in 2024. She holds a Bachelor's of Law degree from the University of KwaZulu-Natal and is committed to delivering professional, ethical, and result-driven legal services. Mandisa is passionate about the intersection of law, innovation, and creative industries. She currently serves as a country representative of Fashion Law Institute Africa, where she advocates for stronger intellectual property protection and legal awareness for creatives and fashion entrepreneurs across the continent. Mandisa, we're happy to hear from you.
Thank you so much, everyone. It is amazing to be with you guys today. This is an amazing platform, and so far the speakers have just been amazing in giving us insight on, Africa, its potential, and where we are currently. South Africa. So the current legal landscape for South Africa, I think I'll define it as multi-layered at the current moment. South Africa so we have a organization that governs registration of trademarks, and we call that the CIPC in abbreviation, but it's usually called the Companies and Intellectual Properties my apologies, I'm receiving a call, commission. And so basically that organization is where every single person in South Africa who wants to register their IP or intellectual property, be it trademark or copyright, they will register it through the CIPC. The CIPC is an online platform, and I think the current issues that we might be facing or we're facing from our in the industry is that even though the CIPC governs this, there are obviously acts that individually protect certain things. So we've got the Copyright Act, we've got the Trademarks Act, we've got the Designs Act, and we've got the Patents Act. These acts, they protect brands, the logos, the designs, innovation within the fashion industry. But the biggest issue that we're seeing right now is the weak implementation of, enforcement of IP. A lot of people are not well versed in understanding that they need to register their IP, and I understand why. It is expensive. I think it's a conversation our keynote speaker touched on, that a lot of designers, in as much as there's designs, they're brilliant and creative. I think South Africa as well, we're amazing, but we're seeing not a lot of people going the registration avenue. We're seeing a lot of emerging fashion brands coming up in South Africa. A lot of brands, a lot of designers, talented and amazing work that they're putting out there. But there's a lack of registration, and a lack of registration then has a ripple effect onto what we would be another issue that we're dealing with, which is dupe culture. Right, and I'll call it dupe culture, but basically copying and imitation of these designs. And the lack of the registration is due to another issue, finances. In as much as the CIPC, when you go onto the website and you register your design, it comes with an application that needs to be done, and that application needs to be preferably go through an attorney, and it is costly. Attorneys are costly, and submitting that application, it's going to be costly because it's time and attorney fees and all of that. But the actual organization makes it cheap. The only issue now is you having to have, someone with legal information, with legal help to assist you in submitting this application. And that legal help comes with a huge cost factor to it. So that's the issue that we're picking up at the current moment. And like I mentioned, it is creating a ripple effect. Now, how so? The counterfeiting, the dupe culture. These designers are amazing, they're good, but then they find themselves in predicaments where their designs are being replicated. The designs of Mandisa comes along and she's seen Stacey's design. Mandisa has, the financial backing to quickly go and register the design. Automatically, it becomes a problem for Stacey. What happens to Stacey in that moment, And even though, for example, social media plays a huge influence, Stacey will know, Stacey and her followers will know that, she owns this design and she came up with it. But now Mandisa, with being able to, go ahead and with the legal backing and financial backing, she has now overtaken Stacey. So it is a bit of a challenge that we're seeing. But also, not only just that there's also a sustainability issue in the country, as well as a cultural appropriation. Cultural appropriation has been a huge issue, I think, for Africa globally, to everyone, sorry, not globally, in Africa specifically. Just to highlight quickly on my case study that I thought would resonate with the issues that we're having. It may not be the latest, but it reinforces the issues of IP protection and its enforcement within the sphere. So a few years back, we had Matrosa. I think a lot of us know Matrosa here as one of those Xhosa emerging brands. It's no longer emerging because, I mean, they're now all the way in Paris Fashion Week. But it's still a local brand. It still remains being a local brand. And this particular year where Zara decided to semi-imitate, a sock and sorry, I'm getting interrupted. They imitated a design specifically from Matrosa. Now, the issue that we're seeing here is that Zara is a fast fashion brand. Matrosa at the time was just a brand, new, local, small in its rights at the time, but with all its IP in order, right? And as much as the case did not go to high court and it did not go to litigation route, but we are now seeing how IP enforcement is essential. Now, how do we do that? We do that through registration, we do that through all of those things, copyright and so on and so forth. But the principle of an expression being protected is also a gray area for us. So we are now battling with not only this being made an example, we're now battling with bigger brands imitating our African brands, taking ideas from us. I think our keynote speaker spoke about the Ankara fabric, so things like that and so forth. But also it then goes to show the challenges of the cross-border enforcement challenges that we have, and just the cost implementation again. But originality still requires us to have copyrights, to have registration in it, and you I think as designers and sorry, my time is up. Sorry, there's a lot to talk about.
Imagine there's a lot
There's
to talk
definitely
about.
a lot to talk about.
Yeah,
South Africa
has one of one of the more advanced frameworks and
yes.
policies within Africa. So I can imagine that there's a lot to talk about, but we will have more time, maybe a bit more time during the question session.
Yes, thank you so much.
No problem. We'll be moving on to our rep from West Africa. We'll be speaking with Dennis Akwaba. Dennis Akwaba is a Ghanaian lawyer with experience in corporate and commercial practice, technology law, intellectual property, and creative industry advisory. He works with the team at Sustainary Attorneys, supporting startups, tech companies, fashion brands, and creatives on compliance, innovation, and brand protection. Passionate about fashion in Africa and the evolving field of fashion law. He runs The Law Behind the Fashion, a LinkedIn series exploring the legal issues shaping the continent's fashion industry. Dennis, the floor is yours. Please.
Thank you. I hope everybody can hear me. Can everybody hear me, please?
Yes.
Awesome. So thank you guys for this awesome gathering. I think it's very important that we have the conversation. And so on the state of affairs in my country, I have a lot to say and I have to make it really fast. But we are looking at essentially the same thing is happening around Africa, right? Everybody has the core IP framework already done. I have an argument that I say that most of the IP framework that were done in Africa did not come up with the intention of fashion. Like they didn't have fashion in mind. It was just a general IP approach to protecting people's designs and all that. So we have the core IP framework to in Ghana. We have the Copyright Act. We have the Industrial Designs Act. We have the Industrial. We have actually a Geographical Indications Act, which came in 2003. And I'll tell you something funny about that because no act had been registered under the Geographical Indications Act until like last year. So the act has been essentially dormant, which is interesting. Apart from us having these core IP framework as a country, we also have the other laws that play or like interplay with the law. So we have the Labor Act, which in my opinion is, and most people would say that is heavily formalized. So it focuses on the formal sector of the economy, the workers. So I will say we will still have a fashion garment workers outside the Labor Act, right? We also do not really have any consumer protection laws in Ghana when it comes to fashion or anything like that. So in that space, you realize that the law is fragmented. We have the Sale of Goods Act and Electronic Transactions Act, thinking about digital business and all that. That is like one of the things that we have when it comes to the laws. But there's a policy gap here. And to understand the policy gap in Ghana, you have to look at the full cycle of a fashion product. I thought of it that way, that if we put all the fashion systems together, it gives you a clearer picture of what the actual gaps are. So let's say if you're looking at the raw materials aspect or the section in Ghana, we know that for the raw materials, there's no legal or no legislation that requires local sourcing. That's a gap that nobody in Ghana is mandated to source locally or anything. There's no law, there's no law like that. So if you look at the design and intellectual property aspect of production, we have the core IP framework, but there's a problem, right? That these IP frameworks do not extend towards to our traditional knowledge. So that is another gap that exists there. That although the IP framework exists, but there are actual issues that are very indigenous to Africa. That is our traditional knowledge. And if we are not able to protect that, we are missing out on a lot of things, right? That is one of the side. And we are looking at manufacturing too. We are looking at that the fact that there's no proper supply chain requirements for how do you call it? The due diligence for supply chain, right? So normally, if you look at the European countries like France and other countries, they have these requirements for companies to do a due diligence in their supply chains to make sure that they are not committing any human rights or environmental or severe health violations, right? We do not have anything like that when it comes to our manufacturing sector. And you realize that Ghana's manufacturing sector is heavily informal. So what happens is that these people are almost not protected, although they are in the manufacturing space. They do not come under the actual the IP framework. If you look at the trade and access and the market access to, although Ghana is part of like a couple of how do you call it, regional bodies like ARIPO, we have beneficiaries under AGUA and all that. The gap still exists because we are heavily dependent on export than import and export, right? And that means that most of the things that are happening are not even going outside, or if they're going outside, they are going outside at a very hefty cost. So the gap that exists there is there's no strategy for fashion exports. Although we have free zones in Ghana, which is supposed to push for relaxed export procedures, but there's no strategy for that specifically in Ghana, which is also a gap that I identified. Also, when you look at the retail and e-commerce sector, I spoke about the Electronic Transactions Act. This act came around 2008, so essentially predated the social media era, right? So it doesn't really capture what is happening now on Instagram and TikTok, right? I have people who will be on TikTok, let's say live selling clothes. Like there are so many things that are happening right now in that space, particularly, and our laws are a little slower, and it's not catching up with these things. So that is another gap I identified in that particular space. But I think one of the gaps that we all really agree with is the end of life. I mean, Ghana has Cantonment, which is the world's largest second-hand clothing market, right? So there's a visible gap of regulating the end of life of a clothes, like of the fashion product that comes into the country. Cantonment receives about 15 million clothes every week, and the All Foundation's research says that about 40% of those clothes and become waste after they are imported in the country. So imagine the waste that we have to deal with. But the country doesn't even have any waste measurements, how do you call it, infrastructure, to even know how much waste we are taking on as a country to be able for us to be able to discard it. We do not have any extended producer responsibility with laws here when it comes to that aspect of our economy. So now it becomes really hard to even hold people responsible, right? And then these are the gaps that I think are cutting across the value chain. Now, but there's a major gap that I think everybody spoke about. Kenya has a fashion council, that Ghana doesn't have a fashion council. Which I believe if we start from there, we'll be able to have one voice. Because the problem with this industry is that as Africans, as African founders and fashion designers, we do not have one voice. I mean, we are trying, everybody's saying something, we're almost saying the same thing, right? But the voice has to be one in order to be able to be strong and push policies. And that is like the major thing that I feel like we are losing or out on. So, yes, but there's a political will. There's a political will to do all these things. Recently, I think last year, the Minister of Trade proposed a policy framework for fashion and textiles. So we don't know what is happening with that particularly, but I believe that very soon they will bring out something. So there's a political will, just that is very slow here. And for the case study, I think I'll go back to Ghana's geographical indication and the implications for Africa as a whole. As I said earlier, the GI Act in Ghana was passed in 2003. So imagine how slow we have been to even protecting something so dear to us, because it's been so long, right? And there are other textile distinctions in Ghana, like there are so many. There's fugu, there's other things that we could also protect. So using that as a case study, I think like Africa, we should be faster, because now we are being exposed in a wider market where if someone does an inspired act, it probably passes under the radar and is allowed under the law. So it's for us to protect almost everything we can protect and make it our own. And that's the only way we can earn some money or some revenue from. Because if you are not protecting it, how can you say it's yours? So that is essentially the landscape in Ghana in short. Yes.
Thank you so much. Thank you so
You're
much.
welcome.
That was very, very, and even Nigeria, we struggle with the same second-hand market regulation and adverse effects to our consumers and consumer behavior and all of that. So we really
Yes.
appreciate the breakdown.
You're welcome. Thank you.
We have one more speaker from Central Africa. Her name is Kelisha Masala. She's a legal professional with unique cross-continental perspective, bridging African, European, and North American legal systems of Congolese heritage. Born in France and currently based in Canada, she specializes in intellectual property law, information technology law, and development with a strong focus in fashion and creative industries. Kelisha, we had an earlier representative from Central Africa, Ms. Sandra Jokomoyo. For you, I would just pose a quick question, and then you can also just give a recommendation after you answer the question within the same 3 minutes. The question I would be posing is, what is the one policy that your region's fashion industry needs the most right now? As well as, so you can just help us with that question, and then maybe a quick, and also maybe that will also act as your recommendation. And we can move, and then every other speaker would give one recommendation as well, 1 minute tops. Kelisha, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. And it's really an honor to be a part of this needed conversation. I was told that I was supposed to talk about the journal, because something that we need to mention is that we are having the inaugural issue of the Journal of African Fashion Law and Policy and Innovation. And so I wanted to talk about that real quick, Renan, if you have time, and then I'm going to reply to your question. So what is particularly striking, looking across the submissions we received for the inaugural issue of the journal, and more broadly across the conversation, such as right now, is that despite the diversity of legal systems, languages, and markets, the same structural question keeps emerging again and again. And I think that's where a Pan-African perspective becomes useful, not to flatten differences, but to identify patterns. And there are 3 patterns I came across. So the first pattern is fragmentation. Across the continent, fashion operates across borders. So designers produce in one country, manufacture in another, and they sell digitally across several markets. But the legal frameworks remain largely national, sometimes regional, and often inconsistent. We see this with IP registration. We see this with customs procedures, with consumer protection rules, and even with enforcement mechanisms. So what we have is a highly interconnected creative industry, but a fragmented legal architecture. And this creates friction, especially for emerging designers trying to scale beyond their domestic markets. The second pattern is the tension between informal economies and formal legal systems. So a significant portion of African fashion production, and we heard it earlier this morning, is driven by micro enterprises, artisans, and informal networks, which are incredibly dynamic, innovative, and culturally grounded. But most legal frameworks, especially in IP and commercial law, assume documentation. They assume registration, and they also assume institutional access. So you can see that there is a structural mismatch here. Designers technically have rights, but in practice, enforcement is limited. Access to justice is constrained, and informal copying becomes normalized rather than litigated. And this is not simply a legal issue, it is an economic and institutional one. And the third pattern that I've came across is the rapid acceleration of technology, particularly digital fashion and platform economies. And we are seeing designers now using AI tools, experiment with digital garments, NFTs, virtual models, sometimes faster than the law can even conceptualize these developments nowadays. So across multiple submissions, one question keeps coming: who owns what and under what conditions in a system where creation is increasingly mediated by technology? And currently, most legal frameworks in African jurisdiction, including Central Africa, Congo, remain anchored in assumption of human authorship, territorial enforcement, and physical goods. So again, there is a lag, not in innovation, but in governance. So when we take these 3 patterns together, fragmentation, informality, and technological acceleration, what emerges is not a lack of creativity or legal frameworks, is a lack of coordination. And I think that it's a very important distinction, because African fashion is not starting from zero, like God's love was saying. The laws exist, the industries exist, the talents exist, but the systems are not yet aligned. And this is precisely why the development of the journal of scholarship in this space is so important. One of the most interesting things we observe through the journal process, especially now that we are almost done with the peer review phase, is the level of intellectual maturity emerging across the continent. We are seeing rigorous doctrinal analysis, sophisticated policy frameworks, and increasingly a shift from descriptive work to conceptual contribution, which is essential. Because before harmonizing, before reform, before policy, there needs to be clarity in how we define the field itself. And journals like this are not just platforms for publication, they are tools for structuring the discipline. They're going to shape the vocabulary, the priorities, and ultimately the direction of regulation. So thank you, Irene.
Thank you so much. In the little time you had, you were able to really do justice to inform us about the journals and the importance it has in policy making and even in dissemination. Sadly, this has been an enlightening conversation, but sadly, we have come to the end of this panel session. But we've been able to achieve our objective of seeing our commonalities across the different regions. We've been able to see that we all have the same unique ownership obstacles or structures that make some of this Western influenced IP frameworks difficult to enforce. There's definitely fragmentation across our borders when it comes to our laws, and the issue of our high informal economies that result in a lack of education, lack of awareness regarding these frameworks and regulations, regarding the existing frameworks and regulations. The picture clearly, as we can see, is not perfect, but it is clearly unfinished. And what an honor it is to be sitting at what would one day be a crucial point in history. Thank you so much to all our regional representatives for taking the time to enlighten us and to give these insights. Thank you to our fellows for being so interactive. It's been a pleasure moderating this session. My name is Irene, and we'll be moving on to our next panel 2. God's love, over to you. Thank you.
Okay, Irene, thank you so much. I think I'm enjoying where we're going to with this. That was nicely done to every representative. Thank you for doing your homework. Your job was well done. Listening to you all, I felt I was in those countries and understanding. Of course, these reports are letting us know where we're getting wrong in Africa and where we can do better, and places where we're actually headed somewhere. So you can see that there's some countries that are actually more advanced when it comes to protecting these rights and addressing these issues, and some countries that are a bit laid back when it comes to these issues. Once again, I would say that's why we have this institute, us coming together to put up something remarkable where we can maybe one day look back and say, we did that, and we have a more amazing policy and framework for Africa. Okay, quickly, I want to move on to the next panel. One more time, thank you so much to Irene for that incredible session. Okay, now I want to go on to our next panel. This panel will be discussing basically when it comes to our stakeholders and our industries, our basically different parts that make up what we're looking at. And now we're looking at fashion organizations in conversation. This is where they come together to speak and have conversations on things that bother the fashion space in Africa. I told you earlier that we're going to be speaking on harmonization very soon. This time we're going to be speaking actually on the harmonization. So for panel 2's handling the topic, fashion organizations in conversation, fragmentation, harmonization, and cross-regional collaboration. Handling that is Damilare Olusheye, the creative lead of Art by Olusheye Dami. So a quick bio of Dami for Dami takes over. Olusheye Damilola Damilare is a fashion, textile, and technological designer and the founder of Art by Olusheye Dami, a design agency she has been running for over 5 years. Through her work, she provides end-to-end design and development services, helping brands translate ideas into fully realized production-ready collections. She studied industrial design and fashion design and technology at Yaba College of Technology and has furthered her education through programs with the University of Arts London in partnership with Kering, focusing on sustainability in fashion, as well as Cornell University, where she explored fashion marketing. With over 6 years of experience and more than 100 clients globally, her work spans fashion illustration, textile design, technical development, and production management. She has also taught design and design development. I'll take that again. She has also taught design and design development at Fashion Academy Abuja and held roles as assistant creative designer or director and senior designer across multiple fashion brands. Olusheye's approach is grounded in a clear philosophy that fashion design is the product design of clothes. She is driven by a desire to create pieces that are not only beautiful but practical, thoughtful garments that work, function, and bring ideas to life in a meaningful way. Amazing read there. Hello, Dami, you're welcome. The floor is yours for to moderate this panel session. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much as well, God's love. First and foremost, before we begin, I would like to say that we have done such a great job. We have covered quite a lot of ground, and I think that from our keynote speaker all the way to the first panel, we've had such a great time and we've delved into so many things. Now that we're moving forward and rounding up this conversation, I'm really excited to have this conversation and see what our speakers right now have to say about how to actually move forward. Isoma said something at the beginning of, said something during her keynote study. She said, during her keynote talk rather, she said how most of the time she would get on calls and they're like super endless calls. And then they would say, oh no, harmonization is not the answer. What is the other approach? So. In order for this not to end up as another endless call, let's talk about how we can actually move forward. That said, I'm really excited to have the other members of this panel join the call, turn on their cameras and begin this conversation. We would start with a brief introduction of everybody. Hi, everyone. So what that looks like is, could we please have Dr. Alex Nwaba, Mrs. Fumi Ajila Ladipo, Mrs. Tony Philip Ania, Miss, I'm not sure if that's Miss, Nusubuga Ronnie, Susan Sabet, Elizabeth Moore, and Ivy Kakiza. Could we please all turn on our cameras? Hiya, it seems like you're muted.
Hello. I'm sorry, I was
Hello.
struggling a little bit here and there.
How are you?
Good, yourself?
I'm great. Thank you. I'm great. Thank you. Hi, Miss Tony. It's wonderful to see you again.
Hi, good morning. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning, everyone. How are we all doing today? Okay, wonderful. So let's jump straight into it. We've got a very short window in order for us to round up. So I wanted to go straight into it, skipping all the foreplay and all the small talk, okay? Awesome. So could you please introduce yourselves? Tell us a little bit about you and the organizations that you work for and represent.
Oh, my name is Lebo Mojaki. I am from Fashion and Beauty Council in South Africa. I think our work is not as glamorous or amazing as I have realized now. We literally on the ground, we're trying to dig out every little designer, creative, to find who's been doing what, and is the industry measurable? Can we say how many designers we have? What their struggles would be, and how do we come in as the council, to assist. Of course, this also includes, policy, includes governance, includes sustainability, and so on and so forth. So I started this council 3 years ago, and I think more than anything, what we've been doing is really just working and understanding where we are lacking and what it is that we can improve on and just become better and make sure that the industry in South Africa is not as fragmented as it is, and also to ensure that policy is informed by people on the ground, not just people, just policies that are there that are amazing indeed, but they are not informed by real designers, creatives, and heritage designers as well. So I think more than anything, we come from that background, and also as a designer myself for the past 10 years. And I think that is what inspired me to say, if I struggled to come into the industry, how do I then play a role in ensuring that designers that come after me don't get to struggle as much as I have. I hope that sort of covers who we are and what role we play in the industry.
I think that is wonderful. First and foremost, I think it's from those of us here on this call, we can easily say that the only glamorous thing about the fashion industry is the result. The background is just too dirty.
That is so true.
It's so messy. So trust me, we know that it is not glamorous. It's wonderful that you said the designers coming after you, how they wouldn't struggle based off the work that you're doing. And that's such wonderful work. Now let's move to Ms. Tony. Could you tell us a little bit about you and your company?
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Olutoni Philippa, and I've heard a few people here say we don't have a Nigerian Fashion Council. Unfortunately, that's not true. We do. Last year, the sitting president asked the Nigerian Board of Technical Education to inaugurate a sector scale in fashion, and from there we evolved into the Nigerian Fashion Council, which we were able to conclude sometime last year. And Bernice is actually one of us. She was the legal person who handled all that transition. I presently run two organizations: Blue Velvet Fashion Blue Velvet Fashion Consulting and Blue Velvet Fashion Institute. I saw finally getting to meet an alumni of mine from IFM Paris. I also did my executive masters at IFM Paris, and yeah, basically I am the council advisor for the Nigerian Fashion Council. Thank you.
Okay, wonderful, 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 wonderful. I'm always so excited when we're having conversations about the actual growth of the industry. I know earlier, I think Isoma said how the Nigerian fashion industry in general is more like creatives. All of us are just being friends. We're not actually running an industry. And it's wonderful to see initiatives such as the Fashion Law Institute and also the Fashion Council, the Nigerian Fashion Council that has been open. Also, even seeing fashion educational bodies develop things that actually help shape this from just fashion is it my passion to an actual working, functional industry. So moving straight into our first question, right? Based on everything we've heard today, we've spoken a lot about fragmentation, we've spoken a lot about harmonization. Based off everything that we've heard today, what would you honestly say the most realistic opportunity for the organizations in the different regions to move forward, right? Because again, we keep saying IP, we keep saying this, we keep saying that. We're saying 12 different issues. What is the first step forward right now? And where do you think that your roles can work into, again, the next step? Because we can't keep looking at the end goal and not talking about how do we get there? How do we begin? So where do we begin?
Well, I think from our side, it has always been data, and it will continue to be data to find out how many South African designs we have, the established ones and the ones that are just started, what the challenges are, how can we come in. And I think going forward, if we have data in place, and by data, I literally mean every piece of data that we can, have access to or get our hands on, to say, okay, we have so many designers and these are their challenges. This one's are starting, this one's are established already. That will help us to have a scientific number and know precisely what the challenges are, so we can map our way going forward, informed. Because like I said earlier on, policies are there, but they are not informed by practice. And if they're not informed by practice, really, what are we even doing? So I think for us is to make sure that we have the data in place and we look at it and how does it look like and what are we doing with it and how can we move forward so that we can fix and move forward. And I must say, I was surprised earlier on when I think one of the speakers said there isn't Fashion Council in Nigeria, because this is an organization that I'm very inspired by, and I really have who can I meet? Where can we talk? Because they've done amazing work. I mean, in South Africa, indeed, we do have amazing policies, framework, so on and so forth, but they're not informed. But Nigeria has really been able to build a global influential industry in terms of momentum and design and everything. And for that, I'm saying kudos to Nigeria. And I think that is another organization that I would love to really have conversation or bilaterals so we can see what we can learn from them. And hopefully they will learn something from us. So for us, it's totally data. Data is imperative, it's important for us because we're really just starting, and we're looking forward to learning as much as we can and being better.
Wonderful. And you?
Okay, let me take off from where Lebo, I hope I pronounced that right,
yes.
Which is data. So basically, data is a fundamental problem, but how then do we gather data, right? And one of the things I originally had a challenge with in looking at the entire scope of the Nigerian fashion ecosystem, like Isioma rightly said when she was making her presentation, because truthfully, we didn't have an industry until, I dare to say until now. What we've always had is an ecosystem. Is precisely how do we gather information, right? And how do we get the data of people? Because that's exactly how we know to collaborate. Because if you don't have information, then you can have harmonization and then you can have collaboration, right? Now, when you are looking at data collection, one of the things I decided to look at was what are the positives we have right now and what are the negatives? Writing down the positives, which is, for example, the fact that the government has even decided to even give us some sort of notoriety, something that they are even according us some sort of it might sound funny, but if you sit down with government officials here in Nigeria, you would truly understand what I'm saying. Secondly, we have to look at the fact that we are generating so much influence that people are actually trying to steal intellectual property from us. That is a good thing. You have to realize that. Number three, you also have to realize that people are trying to actually get educated, some sort of expanded education within the fashion industry. Now, what are then the challenges? There's so much duplicity when it comes to associations. For example, I'm sure if you say garment associations in Nigeria, almost 20 people will raise their hands up. So how do we make sure we can actually give every association a singular duty, right? It's not about trying to collapse all of them. No, it's about trying to say, okay, so for this specific garment factory, can you focus on this? Association rather, can you focus on this? On this other association, can you focus on this? Can you focus on this? Basically giving everybody some sort of specific responsibility. That's one. Now, once you have all that information about those associations, you start building your data bit by bit. Secondly, you also have to look at the value chain. Now, unfortunately for us, we don't truly understand what the value chain really looks like. Right? Because you have the fashion industry comprises of several categories. You've got beauty, you have cosmetics, you have perfumes, you've got garments, then you've got footwear. Under footwear does not even fall under leather goods, because sometimes you can make footwear with fabrics. Then you have leather goods, then you have hardware, jewelry, then you have accessories. So they are broken into several categories, right? Now, the value chains that exist within each of these components have to be taken seriously into account. And how do we also make sure that we can build associations for every single part of the component of each of the categories that exist within the value chain? Right? Because once you have associations existing for all these components, then you can also gather data. Now, who holds on to the data? Who is responsible for gathering this data? It would definitely have to be the councils. They have to be responsible for that. So this is one of the things that we are presently working on in the Nigerian Fashion Council, because we see that the challenges that we have go beyond just trying to build brands, but it goes into how to structure the industry from the foundation before we start building a skyscraper. Thank you.
Sounds wonderful. Thank you very much for that. We've had Ms. Lebo speak about data, and we've also had Ms. Tony speak about how before we even start having conversations about data, let's have conversations about the right foundations. I think that's absolutely wonderful. We've heard things about data. I think when you think about data, we also have to acknowledge, number one, that we're in Africa, who is great and powerful, but we've had things like colonization that has happened, and it has really messed with some in terms of accurate archives, in terms of our national archives, things like that. Those have been thwarted with, and in some ways, that's why we're having conversations like who really owns jollof rice, because the appropriate records that were supposed to happen in the past have not been managed as well as they could have been. While they have done great work so far, we are now here today to pick on the great work that they have done and also possibly move forward. I know that Ms. Tony spoke about how we should have focused associations, so that way, and I think that's also something to discuss. Focused associations actually makes a lot of sense, because she said something, if you say garment manufacturers in Nigeria, 7 people will raise up their hand. If at this point it's becoming multiple political parties preaching the same agenda, and it is getting a little funny. But I think most of the time the reason that people are doing this is because they are sort of looking for their own advantage, sort of trying to make sure that I'm covered up. And that is usually the block between fragmentation and harmonization. Because regardless of how much we like it and how much fashion is our passion, regardless of that, we must understand that the fashion business is a business. And so ultimately, most of the time, people are looking out for their pockets or their country's pockets. But then we must begin the conversation and the re-education of people that's what is good for all of us is good for you too. That said, I want to introduce Ms. Susan. She cannot turn on her video, but she is around and she would be able to contribute to this conversation adequately. Ms. Susan, could you please introduce yourself? Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you very much. I hope you can hear me at least.
Yes.
I don't know why the video doesn't want to turn on. Thank you so much for inviting me and being among so many inspiring and accomplished speakers. I am the co-founder of the Egyptian Fashion and Design Council, which was established in 2018. I'm also spearheading Egypt Fashion Week that was first launched in 2023, and where we had amazing international, regional, and local PR media value that topped $1.2 million. So CNN, BBC. So I think coming back then to media, how important media is in bringing our mission across. One of the things also as a fashion council in Egypt, at least, we are a non-profit. We solely rely on funding from sponsors, funds, which is not very easy sometimes. So we finally are going to introduce an advisory board and committee that I felt is very important because they're all leaders in the fashion industry, textile industry, in finance, in education, sustainability, and communication. The much more you can accomplish. Now, for our current project as the council, we are, of course, planning the next edition of Egypt Fashion Week from the 12th to the 15th, and showcase your designers and your craft. We are also 2027. Where also Ethiopia, South Africa are members of BRICS countries. So I think that could be very important for them to be with us. We are also, as the council, doing many exhibitions abroad to showcase our craft abroad. So we're going to Saudi. We're supposed to be now in May, but of course with what's happening, it's not possible. We're going to Vienna. We are going to go to Paris, hopefully very soon again. And as for locally, of course, we try to mentor our designers. We try to connect them with the industry. We're currently working on a project which sets up small production hubs for emerging designers that have problems in the production of small quantities at good quality, which is they cannot afford to often set up their own atelier and find good people that are also expensive. And if they go to big factories that can give them the quality, the problem is they cannot do 1,000 per size per color. So this project is about skill development, of course, women empowerment at the same time, and giving our designers the opportunities to produce good quality. Now, what I was thinking, what could be a very good idea for the intellectual property part is that, of course, because Africa is so big, it's so many countries, everybody has their craftsmanship, and everybody's complaining about the same thing. But why not do a joint event? Go to Paris Fashion Week, do a basically B2B event where all the African countries exhibit their craft, exhibit their producers, invite the media, of course, that are all there from all over the world during Paris Fashion Week, invite the big brands that are in charge to come and see what we do and to directly do business opportunities for our producers and craftsmen, because it's very difficult. I mean, there's a very fine line about being inspired and copying. But if you're going to copy right on, then produce it with us. You know, if you want to do exactly the same thing we do, use our stitches, use our prints, then let us do it for you. And pay fairly, of course. I think an event like this, where everybody's joined forces in a fashion capital like Paris, where everybody is, we don't have to fly them to us to every country, which is impossible, also budget-wise, would make sense and attract the media and bring across our cause.
Thank you so much for that, Susan. I think that was wonderful. Thank you very much for that. It sounds to me like you're thinking about organizing a literal African trade show, which sounds very, very exciting as well. I know that we already have a few we already have a few organizations that host things like this as well. And I think that that in its own way is still speaking towards harmonization right now. So that said, I would love to. Wonderful. Hi, Shimiro. I see that I have a question. We'll take questions once we're done with this last question, and then we'll take questions from the group and round up. Okay. Awesome. So our last question is, what is harmonization to you really? And why do you think we need it? And when I say why do you think we need it, I don't just mean in terms of the how everybody gets their name on a mantle. Because again, fashion business is a business. And so what do you think is the general financial advantage and industry growth that can be directly correlated because of harmonization? Can we start with Ms. Lebo?
Okay.
Okay. Awesome.
I think about a couple of weeks back, we received an inquiry or a query with regards to a situation between two designers where there was a counterfeiting, complaint from one designer to the other. And what I quickly realized was how the bigger brand was, or the bigger designer was quick to, to bully, to harass and frustrate the other. And then I think things like this happen because we're not harmonized. We don't have a clear structure. Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you just fine.
Oh, okay. Oh, okay.
Yes,
so I'm saying I realized quickly that we have a problem of structure that needs to be addressed quickly, because if we had one entry point when it comes to how do we deal with conflict, this would have been addressed in a more structured, more respectable way, as opposed to what was happening, where it was like a whole lot of, disagreement and bullying and harassment and so on and so forth. So I believe that if the whole industry of fashion is harmonized, is structured, it will be easy for us to deal with issues as a collective, not in silos. Because I think what we have learned from the West is how they're able, from whatever industry they're dealing from, they will always go as a group and they will always win. I had, earlier on a situation where, the designers from the West went into Nigeria and, we had the story. But things like that happen because we are not harmonized. We're not a collective. We always go, in silos. If, let's say Chanel comes into the country and they want to work with, say, Elizabeth Moore, Elizabeth Moore is alone. Nobody will advise. Nobody knows what's actually happening. By the time they're done, we can just hear, Elizabeth Moore crying, oh, this is what happened, but who's going to help? What needs to happen? But I believe that if we go together as a collective, we are able to fight together and be able to win. But more than that, just to build a sustainable, structured industry of fashion, locally, regionally, even continentally. I think that is one of the most important things for me, looking at how fragmented, the industry is.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. Okay. Can we have Ms. Tony? Ms. Tony, can you speak? Okay.
Yes, I can. So last year when I was presenting my thesis in Paris, one of the things I realized very gravely was how the term brand DNA was used. Based on my practice as the lead consultant with Blue Velvet Fashion Consulting, what I really do is I am a brand DNA anatomist and archaeologist. Now, how does that dovetail into harmonization? Basically, you have duplicity of expressions within the states or local governments or local or villages within any country, right? one of the things we really have to identify for us to make sure that conflict does not arise is, what are the various techniques, or what is the exact technique, for example, of how tie and dye is done in Abeokuta, and what are the exact techniques used for producing tie and dye in Kano, right? Once you are able to document the various techniques that each community uses, number one, you will dissolve conflict resolution. So, for example, based on what I think Sandra was the one who raised the issue of the kente fabric in Ghana and Ivory Coast. One of the ways that they can easily distinct that is, let's go back to the communities where kente actually originated from in both Ghana and Ivory Coast. What is the presiding DNA that exists within this community? And how did they actually produce their original kente? For example, if, say, in Ivory Coast, they used banana fiber to create their textile, and then in Ghana, they used cotton to create their textile. You see that there is a difference already. So now when we take that and we actually document each of these things, we are automatically building these lost archives that you were talking about, right? And then everybody then knows that, okay, for this region, this is what they used, and this is how they have developed their own stuff. Yes, it is similar. Take, for example, the Ashoke as well. You know, the Ashoke that is produced in Ilorin is different from the Ashoke that is produced in Ekiti, different from the Ashoke that you see in Oyo State as well. You know, so we can make sure that we are that detailed in documenting techniques and outlooks of how each thing comes out. And by so doing, when we have all identified where we are, we can harmonize. Now, I think Susan was saying something about traveling and then having this exhibition and all. That is quite good. It's quite a notable thing, but we have to make sure that first at home we have protected what belongs to us with the legal system, because anybody can come back and say, after all, you guys are producing silhouettes that belong to the Japanese, which is the kimono. Who is paying for that? Who are we going to, how many designers do you want to go and meet to say, pay for using the kimono silhouette from Japan, or pay for using this kimono silhouette from the Middle East? Do you understand what I'm saying? So we have to make sure that we have finished our homework at home first. Then when we come together in the village square, we can all decide that, okay, this is how we are going as a group, or this is what we are doing as a group, or this is how we want to be seen as a group. I hope I make sense.
Yes. Yes, you did. Yes, you did. Thank you so much for that. We have a panelist who also joined the call. His name is Nusombuka Ronnie. Hi, please let me know if I pronounced your name correctly.
Hi guys, my name is Ronnie Nsubuga.
Okay, thank you so much for the correction. Yes. Could you please contribute to the conversation? The last question that we're asking for this panel is, what is harmonization really? And how do you think it can be good for us as a collective?
Okay, just joined in and I think I'm not yet ready. Sorry.
Okay. That's fine. We can move to Susan. Susan, could you please answer that question for us, and then we can circle back to Ronnie.
I don't think she's on the call. I think
She is. She is on the call, but then I think she's not yet ready. I'm not sure. She'll let us know when she's ready. But so far, so good. I've loved hearing what we've had today. I think an obvious from what I've heard from Ms. Lebo and Ms. Tony is that number one, with things like conflict resolution, through harmonization, we're able to do things like better resolve conflict in a way that is if not profitable to everybody, because the truth is you can't really resolve conflict in a way that both of us are completely 100% happy. But it is a step forward into some levels of peace and coordination within the industry as a whole, right? I think that's what you have mentioned. Harmonization would be profitable for us in that way. And then Ms. Tony mentioned things such as documentation, delving into conversations such as real ownership and real responsible parties. So we then begin to have conversations such as cultural appropriation, because if we don't even know where it comes from, how do we know who is appropriating what? All wonderful points, absolutely wonderful points. And all these things truly take time. We can't solve it in one call, but it truly takes time. It takes years of practice. Even if we start to have the conversations of going to each of these communities, finding out what is what and all of that, it will take us some time. While it is taking us some time, we can obviously see that it is profitable for us as a collective and as individuals, because yes, I'll let you come in just a minute.
Okay, thank you.
Awesome. So while it is important for us, and again, I have said fashion business is a business, we must also understand that we are in our own small but significant ways representing our countries and representing our nation. We must acknowledge that while, yes, we can always say this many things have happened to us as Africans, this many things have happened to us as Nigerians or wherever we come from, we must also acknowledge that we are today the people who can fight for our futures, for the future of the designers, for the future of these things. So we can't keep having the conversations of, oh, documentation was terrible 50 years ago. What are we doing about it today? And it's wonderful to see that we are doing something about it today, getting on this call, having Bernice organize this entire thing. It is obvious that there is something happening. And I'm hoping that through these conversations, through networking and so on and so forth, we're no longer just having conversations, but we are taking it a step further into seeing how can I contribute from my corner of the world into truly giving Africa the greatness that we deserve. Okay, Ms. Lebo, you wanted to say something?
Okay, I just wanted to quickly say, really reiterating what Olutuni said. I hope I'm saying it right. Okay. We have been, well, personally, I have been very privileged to be in film as well, still am. And I think when we do films that are based in the 1600s South African, culture, we've realized that we would struggle and not know. Not miss it, but we would not know what they were, and would depend on one picture that one European guy took, or maybe a sketch or a painting, and then that would be like sort of our, point of time. And then in spaces like that, then what we would do would look where the king stayed and what was around, what type of animals, what type of birds, and so on and so forth, to come up with a conclusion on how they could have possibly looked like, but that also does not have design. And I loved so much when she said, how do we protect what we don't know? So we really indeed have a lot of work ahead of us, and we need to acknowledge that it's not going to be an overnight thing. I've worked on documenting African designs, precisely on mainly South African, fashion designs or cultural designs, techniques on how it was made back then, and why is it not being made the same way? Why have we left our techniques? What's different between our techniques and European techniques? If we did indeed have the same, embroidery, why are we not using the same embroidery, the way we did it then? And I think we need, I'm just acknowledging the fact that we need a whole lot of dedication and hard working to make sure that we know what we are protecting. And on what Sarah said about the events that she is thinking of, that is good. And I hear that she's talking more on opening markets for designers, which have always been a problem, well, for me personally, but also with designers that I've been able to talk to, which is something I think we can also note, maybe make a pencil note, mind note of it, and try address going forward. That as much as designers go to your New York Fashion Week, Milan Fashion Week, and so on and so forth, most of the time, more often than not, there isn't. It's like just a holiday. There are no buyers that are in place. There isn't. You just go and network with fellow designers. And I think seeing that she is thinking of something like that, maybe there's something to really think deeply about. Do we have buyers, and where are they from? And the designers that we have, do they meet, the criteria of what the buyers are looking for, so that when people go, they actually come up with, stores that have taken them in, and so on and so forth. So I think that is one thing that Sarah can also look into, seeing that she's thinking of opening markets for designers. Like you precisely said, there's quite a lot of other organizations that are doing amazing work, but I still feel like as much as they are many, that aspect is still lacking, and it's something that we can really dab in and try correct, and so that when designers go abroad, wherever it may be, can even be within the continent, but just to make sure that when they get there, there is buyers, there are stylists, there are media that can cover them, and bring the best that they can, given what the designers would have brought. I'm thinking, if that aspect of market opening and traveling abroad to sell our designers can be looked in, then they can be scaled, I think, in terms of financial gain for designers.
Okay.
Sorry, can I interrupt quickly here?
Please keep it under a minute. Just.
I think there's been a misunderstanding. I'm not talking about designers, particularly going to find retailers. I'm talking about the fashion councils or fashion organizations. Okay, some of the designers showcase the craft, which is mostly being copied. It is the stitches and it's the prints. It's not really the designs of the designers that's copied. So, and together then invite the media to bring across the whole mission of this fashion law, African fashion law, and to invite the big companies like Louis Vuitton, Chanel, Dior, Max Mara, whoever, who are in Paris, to come and to see and to make B2B business, to produce in our countries and to respect the craftsmanship where it's made and pay fairly. So I'm not talking about promoting individual designers at all. Of course, they will be part of the event. You have to showcase the production, you have to showcase the creativity that we have. But the main aim is to showcase the craft that we have, because this is what is mainly used at very low wages if it's done in our countries. So so each country's organization, like us, the fashion councils, whatever organization represents the majority of the industry in each country.
Okay, thank you very much. So to clarify, Lebo, I think she was saying that it's not particularly about having the designers present, it's about having our artisans present. So it is our artisans and the people who actually do these crafts. That is a wonderful idea, and I think it would obviously bring a lot of attention and revenue into these businesses and the industry in general. The issue there then also begins to lie in things like education or said artisans, because most of them are locally trained and things of that nature, which is also wonderful because, again, they learned, because these are African things that we learn through tradition and so and so. So it does make sense that they are locally trained, obviously.
So that is wonderful. But then when you think about it, that is another avenue where harmonization can come in and solve issues, because it then helps us organize our artisans in a way that we can actually benefit from it, where they're actually getting a livable wage and so on and so forth. And so even then, that is another advantage of harmonization possibly in this industry and within all of us as a collective. That said, we will have to round up this conversation. I know we wanted to take a question. And it's for Miss Tony, but we actually have 7 minutes before the end of this conference. So I would appreciate if Miss Tony, if you could answer the question via the chat box, and I will hand over to God's love. And so we can continue this conversation and we can end this conversation and this conference. It's been such a pleasure meeting you, speaking to you, and also hearing what you have to say concerning these topics and how we can move forward as a collective. Thank you so much for having me, and talk soon.
Hello, Dami. Thank you so much. That was quite an amazing discourse. I enjoyed listening to that. The energy level was off the roof. So thank you so much to all the panelists for that particular segment. You, of course, gave a lot of insights on things that were really, really amazing. And I was taking notes, loads of notes. Sincerely, the work is enormous. The work ahead of us is enormous. But because we're here, it shows that we're a step in the right direction. And I believe that very soon, all this would pay off.
Hello,
Okay.
hello, love.
Okay, ma'am, go ahead.
Hi. So I think that Tony should take the question, because we have two questions on fashion education, regulation, and I think she should speak to that particularly.
Okay, thank you so much. So please, Tony, the floor is yours so we can have the answers to those questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. As for the first question by Shemilore, she's asking, what do I expect their skill or business? Okay, so what should you place emphasis on, your skill or your business? To be honest, you have to place equal measure attention to both. If you don't pay attention to your skill, it's like you are disrespecting the customer, right? And if you don't pay attention to your business, you will be the one to suffer at the end of the day, and you don't have a possibility for expansion. If you're also looking at where do we think financial injection can be placed, the truth of the matter is this: fashion is an extremely expensive business. We all know this. And one of the things that we really need to start considering is promoting what you call internships. Because a lot of people get into the business and they lose a lot of money because they haven't learned from predecessors. So I would say before you even start looking for anything financial, you have to make sure you have interned somewhere. I don't know if I'm answering the question rightly. You have interned somewhere. Now, if we want to attract financial moguls, say for example in Nigeria, we want to make sure that Dangote can pay attention to us so that he can inject into the industry. The education and professional systems, hand in hand, must rise up to the occasion to build the trust level of the country to say, yes, now we can put money into this. But right now, we don't have that level of trust because we haven't presented ourselves in like the way the LVMHs or the Chanels or the Hermes of this world have done. So it's not going to take money for us to do that. It is going to take common sense. It is going to take deliberate work to make sure that we actually step out in the way we ought to. For example, young designers who would, they'll make clothes and then put it right in front of their house and then be taking pictures, stuff like that. Little, very little details like that is a turn off. So as an industry or as an ecosystem, we have to start paying attention to the kind of details that we give to our business. Now, if we are looking at policy, we have to look at the entire sphere of what the industry needs to cover. For example, for our own council, what I had to do was I had to look at, okay, so what is it that affects the Nigerian fashion industry as a whole? So we looked at academia, we looked at professionalism, we looked at projects, because we have all kinds of people coming to give us projects that don't make sense or are that they pose a problem. They pose a problem for us in the industry. For example, they will say, oh, they've trained 300 people, and I'm talking about development partners now. They've trained 300 people in tailoring. So now they've given them sewing machines. Now they are now tailors, and then they push them out into the workforce. Then they come and work for guys like you, and they do terrible jobs. So we have to make sure we are going to address projects and programs. Then we are also going to make sure we address sustainability. So the policy is going to literally cover all this sphere. But guess what? We can't also do this in isolation. We have to make sure that for each segment, I had to share the anatomy of how that committee will work with Benny. So she's able to appreciate it more. We have to make sure that every aspect, every component within the industry can put a voice to saying, okay, for us, this is what we need. These are the things we need. If you don't put this in the policy, it cannot cover this area. I hope I've been able to answer all the questions. I hope.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you so much, Tony. That was really good. I was listening to that and amazing. I know that we have a lot of substance with us, especially from the Institute. That means there's a whole lot ahead of us. And we have the brains, we have the capacity here. That means that we are going to achieve something phenomenal. So quickly, I'll just go through the representatives we had for this panel, their names and the council that come from, and of course, each of the representatives and the council they come from. From West African region, we have the Nigerian Fashion Council, that's represented by Mrs. Olutoni Philip Aina, the board member of the Nigerian Fashion Council, founder of Blue Velvet Fashion Institute and Blue Velvet Fashion Consulting. From West Africa also, we have the West Africa Fashion Council, represented by Alex Nwuba, the chairman with Africa Fashion Council. From the North Africa, we have Egyptian Fashion and Design Council, represented by Susan Sabet, the co-founder and secretary general, Egyptian Fashion and Design Council, EFDC, and the founder of Fashion Magazine. From Southern Africa, we have Fashion and Beauty Council, represented by Elizabeth Moore. And of course, from East Africa, we've had with us here Pearl of African Fashion Council, represented by Nsubuga Ronnie. So, hello, Ronnie. Good day. I think I'll just give you a few minutes to tell us something from your council. Let's know how it has been with your council and how your council has been functioning so far. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you so much. I'm glad to be here. I'm actually very happy to be here, full of people that are speaking quite a lot of nice English, full of low regarding fashion law. This is beautiful. I've been following. Much as I came in late, I had an emergency with my kids. I managed to come in late. Anyways, the Pearl of Africa Fashion Alliance is basically the umbrella body here for the fashion industry in Uganda. For the first time, Uganda and around East Africa here, we've managed to bisect our industry in various guilds. And as I speak, we are discussing the best ways on how best we can structure the fashion industry. Now that we have our government support regarding the creative industry, we have fought so hard to see that fashion and design stands out for the first time in our countries here. So the umbrella body, which is the Pearl of Africa Fashion Alliance, it's its first time. I started it 2 years back, but for government to take it up just recently, and accepting to work with us, to me, is something that is so beautiful, that now we can represent quite a number of creatives within the fashion industry here, not just fashion designers, but quite a number of people that are in that very space. Intellectual property here is getting a new face, or can I say it's just a baby that is starting to move right here. So we collaborate with with the Uganda Registration Service Bureau. We've managed to at least have a partnership with it. And normally, any kind of activity they do, at least we are working along with them to see that at least people that work in the fashion space are well represented in all their programs. So for the first time, I would say that Uganda has been sparked on. And yes, we're moving. I'm very happy to be a part of to be looking at Fashion Law Institute. It has inspired me quite a lot, I would say. For sure, personally, my knowledge on intellectual property just started, I think, just last year. And within that very year, I managed to leave everything I was doing. I'm a creative arts director, a fashion show producer, and I manage Crystal Models Africa as one of the biggest modeling agencies here. But I managed to first leave all that business to now get into intellectual property, and at the same time to structure the fashion industry here. Something that is not easy, but yeah, we are moving. So keep up the glory. I like what Fashion Law Institute is doing, and please keep up this. These are the conversations that we need right here. I am also trying my best here to see how best I can invite you guys here, at least for a conference. I'm talking to my government to see if we can host you here. I believe it would be amazing to host you guys here at Serena Hotel, most preferably at the end of the year. But we are going to be in discussions with you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Zubunga. I'm looking forward to that hosting anyway. That was really amazing. Okay, so we're finally wrapping up today's summit. But before we do that, quickly, and once more, thanks to every representative, and even those who unfortunately did not get the chance to speak. We're trying to run with the time at this point. We've gone for quite longer than we envisaged for today's summit. So quickly, we want to go into the launching of the State of Fashion Law and Policy in Africa report. We announced earlier that we needed to have that report. And quickly, we'll be having that particular report right now. To handle that report is the lead programs and projects, the Fashion Law Institute Africa, that's the lead of programs and projects of Fashion Law Institute Africa, in the person of Eliojo, please, Nwuchola. I hope I got that correctly. Please, hello, Nwuchola, you're welcome. The floor is yours. Please give us very briefly a launch.
Hi, God's love. Thank you very much. It's Elio John with Elio John. Thank you very much for that. Okay, so, good day, everyone. It's like past 2. Good day, everyone. Thank you very much for staying with us till this moment. And a whole lot about the fashion and creative industry. At this point, I don't think I should be saying anything about it anymore because we've heard a lot. So going straight into the launch, we at Fashion Law Institute, we decided to come up with a report on the state of fashion law and policy in Africa. So we had contributions from different persons in different regions of Africa, and we have compiled all of that in into a report on the various laws, regulations, recommendations, and all of that. Every person that is interested in the fashion industry, whether you as a creative, as an industry leader, as an expert, we have streamlined all the challenges we face so far, the recommendations that we have, the structures we have put in place, and all of that. So we've compiled everything into a report, and this link of the report will be shared for everyone to access and just contribute and see how you can learn and help yourself with basically everything you need to do in the fashion industry as a continent Africa. So thank you everyone once more for joining us and being with us till this moment. I think we've come to the end of this. I believe everyone is tired and all that, so we have to end it here. So God's love, you can take over.
Okay, thank you so much, Elojo. I got that right now. Okay, thank you so much. That was a very brief report, straight to the point, and that's it. Ladies and gentlemen, I believe in due time we're going to be having a copy of that report. Having said that, it's been quite an amazing journey. This journey started off as someone's thought, and today we have the Fashion Law Institute Africa and having our maiden summit speaking about the fashion law policies in Africa. So it's been quite amazing. For this, I would say we're rounding off for the Pan-African Fashion Law and Policy Summit for 2026. It's been quite an amazing time, from our opening remarks by our executive director down to the keynotes, to our first panel session, second panel session, even to the lunch. Thank you so much. This has been quite an amazing time. Listen, let's not forget that we have quite a huge task ahead of us in Africa right now. Other places where it's working is because people came together to make something work. We're in a continent where if you actually push for something to work, it actually works. And listening to so many persons speak here today, I know that we have the brains, we have the intelligence, we have the network to make all this happen. So, ladies and gentlemen, it's time for us to get to our books, start writing. We start thinking, what policies do we need in Africa to make things better? Oh, okay, I think the link it has been sent on the group. So please let's go through the link. So what policies do we need in Africa to make everything work? That's the only way we can change the narrative for Africa with regards to what we have. And let's keep the conversation going. It doesn't end here. I believe for those who are in our WhatsApp groups, please ensure to join the right group so we can have the conversation going across our social media. Please do not forget to follow us across all social media handles, the Fashion Law Institute Africa HQ. Please ensure to follow through. Let's get the word out there. We can do this, we can achieve this, and it's very important. This vision is something that can change the course of what we have. As our keynote speaker said today, fashion has been here. We've done fashion, we've arrived, we didn't just start. All we're doing now is implementing what the world has been doing, seeing how to protect what we have, police what we have, and of course, see ways to better monetize it to having a better Africa. One more time, thank you to every moderator here today. Thanks to every speaker here today, and to everyone who has been here throughout this period of time for this year's summit. At this point, I want to draw the curtain for the Pan-African Fashion Law and Policy Summit for 2026. My name is Godslove Kamaloni. It's been an awesome pleasure hosting today's session. Thank you so much, and have a very, very wonderful day, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you.